I was 36 years old when my own brother told me to shut up in front of our entire family. We were at Hartwell and Stone, an upscale restaurant downtown where Dylan had invited everyone to celebrate his latest business success. I'd driven 3 hours to be there, even though I knew how these dinners always ended me invisible at the far end of the table while everyone praised him. But that night was different. When I quietly mentioned the sauce, tasted off Dylan's face twisted with contempt. He leaned across the table, voice dripping with mockery. "Chelsea, just sit quietly. Rich people are talking." The entire table erupted in laughter. My mother looked away. My aunt smirked into her wine glass. My face burned. My hands shook. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then, I heard footsteps behind me. Dress shoes on marble, steady and deliberate. A man's voice, clear enough for everyone to hear. "Welcome back, Ms. Little. It's an honour to have the owner dining with us tonight." The laughter died instantly. Have you ever watched someone's whole world collapse in a single sentence? My name is Chelsea Little. I'm 36 years old, and for the last 5 years, I've been building something I've never told my family about. They think I run a small consulting business from my apartment 200 miles away. They're not entirely wrong. I do consult. They just don't know what I'm consulting on, or how much money quietly moves through my accounts every month. I learned a long time ago that some truths are safer kept to yourself, especially when your family has spent decades deciding who you are without ever asking. I was folding clothes in my bedroom when Dylan's name lit up my phone. My brother never called unless he needed something or wanted an audience. I let it ring twice before answering, already bracing myself. "Chelsea, finally?" His voice had that performative brightness he used when he wanted something. "I'm calling with great news. I'm hosting a family dinner this Saturday at Hartwell and Stone. You know, that incredible place downtown everyone's been talking about. I've got some major announcements to make, and it wouldn't be right without my big sister there." I paused mid-fold, a sweater suspended in my hands. Hartwell and Stone. Of all the restaurants in the city, he'd chosen that one. The coincidence felt like the universe testing me. "I don't know, Dylan. It's a 3-hour drive, and I've got work. Come on. When's the last time we all got together? Mom really wants to see you. She was just saying the other day how you never make time for family anymore." There it was. The guilt delivered with surgical precision. I closed my eyes and saw myself at a dozen family dinners just like this one, sitting at the far end of the table, while everyone orbited around Dylan, laughing at his jokes, asking about his business ventures, treating my occasional comments like background noise. "Let me think about it," I said. "Don't think too long. The reservation's for 6 people, and if you can't make it, I'll need to adjust the head count. You know how these high-end places are about numbers." After we hung up, I stood there holding my phone, staring at nothing. I should have said no. Every instinct I developed over the years told me to protect myself, to stay in my quiet life where nobody's expectations could touch me. But then my mother called 20 minutes later. "Chelsea, sweetheart, Dylan told me about Saturday. You're coming, aren't you?" Her voice had that fragile quality that always made me feel like I was disappointing her just by existing. "It's been 4 months since I've seen you. Aunt Diane will be there, and Dylan says he has wonderful news to share. We should be together for moments like this. Family is family, after all." I agreed before I could stop myself. The next 3 days passed in a strange fog of anticipation and dread. I packed, carefully, a simple navy dress. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention. As I was zipping my overnight bag, I noticed Dad's old recipe card on my dresser, the one for his bean soup. The edges were worn soft from years of handling, his handwriting faded, but still legible. Everyone had always said that soup was too bland, too simple. They didn't understand that bland wasn't the same as honest. I slipped the card into my purse. I didn't know why. Maybe I just wanted something of his with me, some reminder that once someone in my family had seen me clearly. As I locked my apartment and headed to my car, I had no idea that this dinner would crack open everything I'd been quietly building. I had no idea that in 48 hours, the family who'd spent decades making me invisible would finally see me, and they wouldn't like what they saw. I arrived at my mother's house 2 hours before we were supposed to leave for the restaurant. She'd asked me to come early to help with appetizers she was bringing as a hostess gift, even though I knew Dylan had probably made the reservation without telling the restaurant we'd be bringing outside food. That was just like him, assuming rules bent around his charm. Mum was in the kitchen when I walked in, surrounded by cutting boards, boards and herb bundles. She looked up and smiled, but it was that distant smile I'd grown used to, the one that said she was happy I was there, but not quite sure what to do with me. "Oh, good, you're here. Can you dice those tomatoes? Make them small, about 1/4 inch. I washed my hands and got to work. We fell into a comfortable rhythm, the kind that comes from years of shared kitchen space. After a few minutes, I tasted the sauce she was making and noticed it needed something. "Mum, I think it could use a little more basil. It's tasting a bit flat." She glanced over, not really looking at what I was doing. "It's fine, Chelsea. I've made this recipe 100 times. I nodded and went back to the tomatoes, letting it go. 20 minutes later, Dylan breezed through the front door without knocking, his voice filling the house before his body did. "Something smells amazing in here." He appeared in the kitchen doorway, perfectly dressed in clothes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. He dipped a spoon into the sauce, tasted it, and made a thoughtful face. "You know what this needs, Mum? A bit more basil, just a touch." My mother's face lit up like he'd just solved world hunger. "Dylan, you're so perceptive. You have such a refined palate." She immediately started chopping more basil, moving with an energy she hadn't shown when I'd suggested the exact same thing. I kept dicing tomatoes, my knife hitting the cutting board in steady, even strokes. I didn't look up. I didn't need to see Dylan's satisfied smirk to know it was there. Aunt Diane arrived 30 minutes later, bringing with her that particular brand of cold appraisal she'd perfected over the years. She hugged Dylan, first holding him at arm's length to admire his outfit. "Look at you, every inch the successful businessman." Then she turned to me with a quick, obligatory embrace that felt like checking a box. "Chelsea, you look tired. Are you getting enough sleep?" We gathered in the living room while Mum finished up in the kitchen. That's when I saw the watch. Dylan was showing it off to Aunt Diane, holding his wrist up to catch the light. I recognised it immediately. Grandmother's vintage Cartier, the one with the delicate gold band and tiny diamond markers. I used to sit with her every Sunday afternoon, carefully polishing that watch while she told me stories about her youth. "Mum gave it to me this morning," Dylan was saying. "She said it should go to someone who'd appreciate its value." Something twisted in my chest, but I kept my face neutral. Aunt Diane made appropriate, appreciative noises, and Mum emerged from the kitchen just in time to hear the praise. "I knew Dylan would take good care of it," she said, not looking at me. "It's important these family treasures go to the right hands." I'd polished that watch every Sunday for 3 years. I'd learned the specific way grandmother liked it, cleaned with a soft cloth and gentle circular motions, never touching the crystal face with bare fingers. But I didn't say any of that. I just smiled and said it looked nice on him. In the car, on the way to the restaurant, Dylan drove while holding court from the front seat, talking about his latest consulting projects. According to him, he was advising major restaurant chains on their expansion strategies, helping them optimize their brand presence. The details were always vague, always impressive, sounding without being specific. "I've got three major clients right now," he said, gesturing with one hand while steering with the other. "Can't name names, obviously, but let's just say if you've eaten at a chain restaurant in the last year, I probably had something to do with making it better." Aunt Diane leaned forward from the back seat. "That's wonderful, Dylan. Real success, the kind that makes a difference." She glanced at me, and I felt the comparison coming before she spoke. "What about you? Chelsea still doing that consulting work from home?" Actually, I'm looking at expanding, I said carefully. There's been interest in developing some new projects. Let's talk about real success, shall we? Aunt Diane's voice cut through the car like ice water. Not everyone can make it in the big leagues. Some people are better suited for smaller scales. Dylan caught my eye in the rearview mirror. His smirk was small but unmistakable. Sis, I'm saying this because I care. You should just accept your limits. Not everyone can make it big. There's no shame in being ordinary. I looked out the window and thought about Dad's soup. I'd been 22 trying so hard to impress everyone at a family dinner. I'd spent all day making his bean soup recipe, the one he taught me when I was 8 years old. I'd boiled those beans 3 separate times, changing the water each time exactly like he'd shown me. When I was little, I'd asked him why we had to boil them so many times. Good things take 3 boilings, Chelsea. He'd set his hand steady on my shoulder as we stood over the stove together. Like patience, most people quit at the first one. They think nothing's happening. But each time you're making something better, you're making something honest. The people who last are the ones who understand that. That night at dinner, everyone had taken 1 spoonful and pushed their bowls aside. It's so bland, Mum had said. Maybe cooking isn't your strength, sweetheart. Dylan had laughed and ordered pizza. Nobody knew that bland soup was exactly what Dad had taught me to make, that every simple, honest flavour was intentional. Nobody asked. Sitting in that car watching the city lights blur past, I smiled quietly to myself. I won't explain any more, I thought. I won't justify or defend or try to make them understand. I'll just let the truth speak for itself, and tonight at Hartwell and Stone, the truth is going to have a lot to say. The restaurant came into view as we turned onto 6th Street, and my breath caught for just a second before I controlled it. Hartwell and Stone stood on the corner like a jewel box, all warm light spilling through tall windows onto the sidewalk. The exterior was exactly as I remembered approving it 3 years ago, the brushed copper signage catching the streetlights just right. Dylan pulled up to the valet stand with a flourish. "Only the best for my family," he announced as if he'd personally built the place brick by brick. "This is one of the hottest spots in the city right now. Took me weeks to get a reservation." Mum pressed her face close to the window, eyes wide. "I've read about this place in Metropolitan Living. They did a whole spread on the chef last month. Dylan, how did you manage this?" "I know people," he said vaguely, which was his standard answer for everything. He handed his keys to the valet with the casual confidence of someone who'd never doubted his right to be anywhere. I sat very still in the back seat, my hands folded in my lap. When Dylan said the name of the restaurant an hour ago, something had shifted in my chest like a lock clicking into place. Of all the restaurants in this city, he'd chosen mine. Not that he knew it was mine. Nobody knew except Thomas, my general manager, and Maria, who'd been with us since 6 months after we opened. And my lawyer, of course. And my accountant. But family. Family had no idea. "That's a wonderful choice," I'd said when he first mentioned it, and I'd watched him completely miss the careful weight in my voice. He'd been too busy congratulating himself to notice that I went very still, that my fingers had traced the rim of my coffee cup 3 times before I set it down. As we walked toward the entrance, I fell back slightly, letting Dylan lead the way with Mum on his arm and Aunt Diane gliding beside them like she was arriving at a gala. I pulled out my phone and stepped to the side. "I need to make a quick call," I said to no one in particular. They didn't even turn around. Thomas answered on the first ring. "Chelsea, everything all right?" "It's me," I said quietly, turning away from my family. "The reservation tonight for 7 under Dylan Little." "Yes, that's my brother. No changes needed to the booking, but I need you to make sure Maria is working tonight. She should see this." There was a pause. Thomas had worked with me long enough to read between lines. "Understood. Anything else? Just treat it like any other reservation. Standard service. Nothing special." "Got it. See you soon." I hung up and slipped my phone back into my purse. My hand brushed against Dad's recipe card still tucked in the inner pocket. I touched it once like a talisman, then rejoined my family at the entrance. The hostess greeted us with professional warmth, checking her tablet. "Little party of 4. "That's us," Dylan said, standing a little taller. "Though I believe I reserved for 7 originally, we had some cancellations." The hostess nodded smoothly and gathered menus. As we followed her through the dining room, I let my eyes travel over everything I'd helped create. The exposed brick walls we'd argued about with the contractor, the custom light fixtures I'd found at an estate sale in Pennsylvania, the open kitchen concept that the architect had initially resisted. Every detail had been a battle, a compromise, a vision slowly taking shape. Mum was whispering to Aunt Diane about the decor, how sophisticated it all looked, how Dylan must really be doing well to afford places like this. I wanted to laugh. The prefix menu tonight was $85 per person, not including drinks. Expensive? Yes, but not prohibitively so. Not the kind of place that should impress people as much as it was impressing them. But that wasn't really what they were impressed by, I realised. They were impressed that Dylan had brought them here, that he had access to this world. It wouldn't have mattered if I'd told them I ate here twice a month. Actually, I'd only eaten here 3 times in 5 years. I was usually too busy reviewing financials and menu costs to sit down for a leisurely meal. We were seated at a round table near the window, exactly where I would have chosen. Prime real estate visible, but not too exposed. Dylan took the seat facing the room naturally, positioning himself at the head of the table, even though the table was round. Mum sat to his right, Aunt Diane to his left. I ended up in the chair with my back partially to the kitchen, which was fine. Better, actually. It gave me a view of the entrance and the bar. That's when I saw her. Maria, 62 years old, had been working in restaurants since before I was born. She told me once that she'd been invisible in every single one until she came here. We'd hired her when she was certain no one would give her a chance anymore, when she thought her career had dead-ended at diners and chain restaurants. Now she was our senior server training new staff and handling our most important tables. She was refilling water glasses 2 tables over, but her eyes found mine across the room. For just a second, her professional mask slipped and something like understanding passed between us. Then she gave the smallest nod and returned to her work. Dylan was already holding court, telling some story about a restaurant consultant he'd met at a networking event. Mum and Aunt Diane hung on every word. I picked up my menu, letting the familiar weight of it settle in my hands. I'd approved this design, chosen this paper, Stock argued for this particular font because it was readable without being pretentious. None of them noticed that I wasn't really reading it. I already knew every dish, every ingredient, every price point. I knew which items had the best margins and which ones we kept on the menu because they made people happy, even if they didn't make us much money. As I set the menu down, I caught my reflection in the window. I looked calm, quiet, exactly how they expected me to look. The invisible daughter, grateful to be included, careful not to take up too much space. They had no idea they were sitting in my world. And in about 20 minutes when the first course arrived, that world was going to start speaking for itself. The appetizers arrived, first small plates of seared scallops with a citrus reduction that I'd watched our chef perfect over 6 months of testing. Dylan didn't pause his story to acknowledge the server just kept talking about some restaurant chain he claimed to be consulting for. Mum and Aunt Diane nodded along occasionally, interjecting with impressed murmurs. I watched the flow of the dining room while pretending to listen. The timing was perfect tonight. Tables were being served in a rhythm that looked effortless, but required careful choreography. The ambient music, a carefully curated playlist I'd spent hours selecting, with our sound consultant played at exactly the right volume. Conversations hummed without overwhelming. This was what good restaurants did. They made everything look easy when it was actually the result of 1,000 small decisions made correctly. Dylan was 3 stories deep into his supposed consulting career by the time the entrees arrived. He'd ordered the aged ribeye mum had the salmon Aunt Diane, chose the duck. I'd gone with the mushroom risotto partly because I genuinely loved it, and partly because I wanted to check if Marco was maintaining the consistency I'd insisted on. Maria delivered our plates herself, which wasn't standard for a table this size. Our younger servers usually handled the floor, while Maria supervised. But she'd positioned herself to work our section tonight, and I knew exactly why. She set my plate down with particular care, her hand steady, despite 40 years of holding heavy trays. Dylan cut into his steak and made an appreciative noise. Now, this is quality. This is the kind of place that understands excellence. He pointed his fork at me. See, Chelsea, this is what I'm talking about when I say you need to aim higher. Places like this don't just happen. They're built by people who understand success. I took a bite of risotto. The consistency was perfect, creamy without being heavy, each grain of rice maintaining its integrity. But something was slightly different about the sauce. Not wrong, just not quite the signature profile we'd developed. The risotto is excellent, I said quietly, though I think the sauce might be slightly different from the usual recipe. It seems like there might be a touch more cream than normal. The words were barely out of my mouth when Dylan's voice cut across the table, loud enough that the couple at the next table glanced over. Chelsea, please. He set down his fork with deliberate emphasis. Just sit quietly. Rich people are talking. The table went silent for half a second, then Aunt Diane laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound. Mum smiled into her wine glass, not quite meeting my eyes. Dylan leaned back in his chair with that satisfied smirk I'd seen 1,000 times, the one that said he'd just put someone in their place and everyone agreed with him. I didn't flinch. I didn't blush or stammer or try to explain myself. I just looked down at my plate and took another bite of risotto, chewing, slowly testing each component. The mushrooms were earthy and rich. The parmesan was the good stuff aged 24 months. The stock was made in-house, I could tell by the depth of flavour. Across the room, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. 2 of our younger servers had paused near the kitchen entrance. One whispered something to the other. They both glanced toward our table, then away, continuing with their work, but with a new tension in their shoulders. Maria was standing near the bar, supposedly checking on a drink order, but her eyes were fixed on our table. I'd seen that expression on her face before in our staff meetings, when someone made a careless comment about one of the newer servers. It was the look of someone who'd spent decades watching people be diminished and was tired of staying quiet about it. Dylan had returned to his story something about restaurant branding strategies that sounded impressive if you didn't actually know anything about the industry. Mum was asking questions designed to make him elaborate, to give him room to sound even more accomplished. Aunt Diane interjected occasionally with the comments about how rare it was to find young people with real business acumen. I ate my risotto and waited. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was simply present, watching the machinery of the evening tick forward toward its inevitable conclusion. That's when I saw Thomas emerge from the kitchen. He was wearing his usual uniform, a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that made him look like he could manage anything from a Michelin-starred restaurant to a Fortune 500 company. He'd been my first hire after I bought this place, back when it was just an abandoned warehouse and a business plan I was terrified might fail. He moved through the dining room with purpose, nodding to familiar guests, checking in briefly with servers. But his trajectory was clear. He was heading toward our table. The conversations around us seemed to dim slightly, or maybe that was just my perception narrowing to this single moment. Thomas reached our table, and the chatter from Dylan, Mom, and Aunt Diane faded as they registered his presence. There was something about the way he carried himself that commanded attention without demanding it. He stopped beside my chair, not beside Dylan's, not between Mum and Aunt Diane, beside mine. "Welcome back, Ms. Little." His voice was clear and warm-pitched to carry without being loud. "It's an honour to have the owner here tonight." The laughter died, just stopped like someone had cut a wire. Dylan's fork clattered against his plate, the sound sharp in the sudden quiet. Mum's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. Aunt Diane's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. I looked up at Thomas and allowed myself the smallest smile. Thank you, Thomas. Everything's been excellent tonight. Though I think Marco might have adjusted the risotto recipe slightly. A bit more cream in the sauce. I'll check with him. You know he likes to experiment on Saturdays. Thomas glanced at the rest of the table, his professional mask perfectly in place. I hope everyone is enjoying their meals. Please let Maria know if you need anything at all. He gave a small nod and walked away, leaving a silence so complete I could hear the couple at the next table whispering to each other. I took another bite of risotto chewed, carefully swallowed. Then I looked up at my family, really looked at them meeting their eyes one by one. Mum's face had gone pale. Aunt Diane was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. And Dylan looked like someone had just told him the ground beneath his feet wasn't solid after all. For the first time in 36 years, I stopped apologising for existing. I stopped making myself smaller. I stopped waiting for permission to take up space. I just sat there, fork in hand, and let them see exactly who I'd been, all along. Thomas remained beside our table, apparently waiting for something. The silence stretched out like glass about to break. Finally, he spoke again, his tone conversational and easy, the way you talk to someone you'd worked with for years. Should I bring out the special reserve we discussed last month? The one from the Willamette Valley? I nodded, keeping my voice level. Yes, please. I think tonight's a good occasion for it. Excellent choice. Thomas smiled and walked toward the wine cellar, leaving my family staring at me, like I'd just materialised from thin air. Dylan recovered first, forcing out a laugh that sounded like something breaking. Wait, you work here? That's great, sis. I'd no idea you'd gotten a serving job. That must be how you knew about the sauce. I set down my fork and looked at him directly. I don't work here, Dylan. I'm the majority stakeholder. I invested 5 years ago when this was an abandoned warehouse on a street nobody wanted to be on after dark. His smile flickered. You invested? Like a small share or something? 40%. I'm the primary owner. I turned slightly as Thomas returned with the wine, showing the label to me first the way he always did. I nodded my approval and he began to pour. Thomas, how's the staff retention program working out? I know we implemented those changes in March. Thomas smiled as he poured the movement practiced and smooth. Remarkably well. We haven't lost a single front of house staff member since we rolled out the new benefits package. Kitchen turnover is down 60%. Morale is the highest I've seen in my 20 years in this industry. That's what I hope to hear. It costs more up front, but people stay when they feel valued. I took a sip of the wine. It was perfect, complex, and balanced with just enough earthiness to complement the meal without overwhelming it. Mum's face had gone absolutely pale, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for her water glass. She opened her mouth twice, but no sound came out. Aunt Diane set down her wine glass with exaggerated care, as if she was afraid any sudden movement might shatter whatever reality she thought she understood. Dylan tried again. But you told us you did consulting work from home. You said it was small scale. I do consulting work for my own restaurant. I consult with Thomas on operations with Marco, on menu development, with our marketing team on brand positioning. It's all consulting technically. I just never specified who I was consulting for. I paused, letting that sink in. And I never said it was small scale. You all decided that on your own. 5 years, Mum whispered. You've had this for 5 years and never told us. I tried once. Do you remember? I was 22, had a business plan, needed a loan to get started. Dylan told you I'd fail. You told me restaurants were too risky and I should focus on something more realistic. So I got a bank loan instead. Higher interest rate, longer payoff period, but I didn't need your permission or your approval. Aunt Diane found her voice, though it came out thin and uncertain. But this place is in all the magazines. Metropolitan Living did a feature. The chef has been on local television. I know, I approved the publicity strategy. I took another sip of wine. We were careful about rolling out media attention. Too much, too fast, and you burn out your novelty. Too little, and nobody knows you exist. Thomas and I spent 8 months developing the right approach. Dylan started to speak, stopped, started again. But you didn't ever say we thought you were just. He stopped again, his face cycling through confusion and something that might have been anger or might have been humiliation. I couldn't quite tell and wasn't sure I cared. You thought I was just what Dylan, a failure. Someone who couldn't make it in the real world. Someone so unremarkable that you could tell me to sit quietly while rich people talked. I kept my voice calm, almost gentle. You all decided who I was without ever asking. You decided I was too quiet, too passive, too ordinary to be successful. And I let you think that because it was easier than constantly defending myself. Mum reached across the table like she wanted to touch my hand, then pulled back. Chelsea, sweetheart, if you'd known what you would have treated me differently, believed in me, stopped dismissing everything I said. I shook my head slowly. The thing is, nothing would have changed. You would have found some reason why this didn't count, why it wasn't real success. Dylan would still be the golden child and I'd still be the disappointing daughter who got lucky once. Thomas reappeared, then checking on our table the way he checked on all our guests, but I could see the quiet support in his eyes. Is everything satisfactory? Perfect, as always? I gestured around the table. Thomas, this is my family. My mother, my aunt, and my brother, Dylan. I didn't elaborate, didn't explain the dynamics or apologise for the awkwardness, just stated facts. Thomas nodded politely to each of them. It's lovely to meet Chelsea's family. She's built something remarkable here. We're all grateful to work with her. After he left, the silence returned heavier this time. Our food was getting cold, but nobody seemed to notice. A nearby table laughed at something, the sound jarring against our frozen tableau. Maria appeared then, water pitcher in hand. She moved around the table, refilling glasses, with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. When she reached me, she met my eyes directly, and something passed between us. A recognition, an understanding. She'd spent 40 years being invisible in restaurants, being treated like furniture by people who thought their money made them important. She knew exactly what I'd been sitting through. She gave the smallest nod, barely perceptible, then moved on to the next table. But that tiny gesture said everything. I see you, I know, you're not alone. Dylan pushed his plate away, the steak only half eaten. Aunt Diane was staring at her duck like she'd forgotten what it was. Mum kept looking between me and the dining room as if trying to reconcile the daughter she thought she knew with the woman who owned all of this. We finished the meal in near silence. Nobody ordered dessert. When the check came, Dylan reached for it automatically, then seemed to realise the absurdity and pulled his hand back. I handled it quietly, adding the staff gratuity and signing the slip without ceremony. Outside, waiting for the valet to bring Dylan's car around, nobody seemed to know what to say. The night air was cool, and I pulled my jacket tighter. Mum kept glancing at me sideways, like she was seeing a stranger. Aunt Diane had her arms crossed her face, unreadable. Dylan stared at the street, jaw tight. My phone buzzed in my purse on the drive home, but I didn't check it until I was back in my apartment. An email from Dylan sent 40 minutes ago. Subject line, partnership, opportunity. I opened it and read 3 paragraphs of explanation about how we should work together, how his expertise could help expand the business, how family should support family. I stared at it for a long moment, remembering every dismissal, every joke at my expense, every time he'd made me feel small. Then I clicked delete and closed my laptop. Some partnerships weren't worth the cost. I woke the next morning to another email from Dylan, this one sent at 6 a.m. with a detailed attachment. The subject line read, Hartwell and Stone expansion proposal. I made coffee before opening it, settling into my kitchen chair, with my laptop and the kind of wary curiosity you'd have watching a storm approach. The proposal was 12 pages long, professionally formatted with charts and projections and a strategic overview that must have taken him hours to put together. He'd outlined a 5-year plan for expanding Hartwell and Stone into a multi-location brand, complete with target cities' estimated build-out costs and revenue projections that were optimistic, bordering on fantasy. His proposed role was Director of Brand Strategy with a compensation package that included equity salary and performance bonuses. The language was polished and persuasive, full of phrases like synergistic partnership and leveraging existing success and capitalizing on market opportunities. He signed it "Let's build this together, sis." Family, supporting, family the way it should be. I read it twice, sipping my coffee and feeling something cold and quiet settle in my chest. It was a good proposal on the surface. If I didn't know, Dylan didn't know his history, didn't know how he operated, I might have been impressed by the effort. But I did know him. And I remembered. I remembered being 22 with a folder full of notes and a business plan I'd worked on for 8 months. I'd saved money from 3 part-time jobs, researched locations, talked to suppliers, learned about food costs and profit margins, and health department regulations. I'd been terrified and hopeful in equal measure when I sat down with Mum and Dylan to pitch my idea for a small restaurant. Nothing fancy, just good food made, honestly. Dylan had listened for maybe 3 minutes before he started laughing. Not a kind laugh, not even a dismissive chuckle. An actual laugh, the kind that made my face burn and my throat close up. "You think people will pay to eat your cooking?" He'd shaken his head like I'd just told him I wanted to be an astronaut. "Chelsea, come on, be realistic. You're good at following recipes, sure, but running a restaurant that takes business skills, that takes charisma, that takes the ability to handle pressure." He turned to Mum, then his voice taking on that reasonable tone he used when he wanted to sound like the only adult in the room. "Lending her money for this would be throwing it away, Mum. She's going to lose everything and then come crying back for more. If you really want to help her, tell her to get a stable job with benefits, maybe something in administration." Mum had looked at me with something like pity and said she thought Dylan might be right. It was too risky. I was too young. Maybe in a few years when I had more experience. I'd walked out of that conversation feeling like I'd been hollowed out. But I didn't give up. I went to the bank instead, filled out loan applications, got rejected by 3 banks before the 4th one took a chance on me, probably because the loan officer's mother had always dreamed of opening a bakery and never did. The interest rate was higher than it should have been. The terms were strict. But it was mine earned without anyone's permission. Sitting in my kitchen, now 5 years later, I looked at Dylan's carefully crafted proposal and felt nothing but clarity. I opened a new email and typed a single paragraph. "Dylan, thank you for your interest in Hartwell and Stone. After reviewing your proposal and professional history, I don't believe our values align regarding business practices and workplace culture. I wish you success in your future endeavours. Best regards, Chelsea." I didn't copy Mum, didn't copy Aunt Diane, didn't offer explanations or justifications. Just sent it directly to him and closed my laptop. My phone started ringing an hour later. "Dylan." I let it go to voicemail. He called again 20 minutes after that. Voicemail. Then a text. "We need to talk about this. You're making a mistake." I didn't respond. I'd said what needed to be said, and nothing Dylan could add would change my answer. I spent the rest of the morning working on actual business, reviewing payroll with our accountant and going over next month's reservations with Thomas. We were booked solid for the next 6 weeks with a waiting list that kept growing. The calls from family members started that afternoon. First Mum, her voice tight with concern. "Chelsea, honey, Dylan told me you rejected his proposal. He's just trying to help. Don't you think you should at least consider it? He knows a lot about business." Then Aunt Diane, more direct. "You're being stubborn, Chelsea. Pride is one thing, but turning down family when they offer help, that's just foolish. Dylan has connections you need." My cousin Emma called next, which surprised me since we'd barely spoken in 5 years. Dylan mentioned you might be in over your head with the restaurant. If you need advice, he's offering it out of love, you know. I took the calls and kept my responses brief. I appreciated their concern. I had things well in hand. My decision was final. No, I didn't need to think about it more. Yes, I was sure. What they didn't tell me, but what I pieced together over the next few days, was that Dylan had launched a quiet campaign. He was calling extended family friends of the family, anyone who might have my ear. His story was consistent. Chelsea got lucky with one restaurant, but she's too inexperienced to know what she doesn't know. She's turning down help out of stubbornness. Someone needs to make her see reason before she runs this business into the ground. He was planting seeds of doubt, expecting them to grow into pressure, expecting everyone to come to me with concern and advice until I relented, just to make them stop. It was a calculated move, and it might have worked if I'd been the person they all thought I was. The quiet one who bent under pressure. The one who wanted approval more than she wanted autonomy. But I wasn't that person anymore. Maybe I never had been. I'd just been choosing my battles, waiting for the right moment to stand my ground. Uncle Robert called on Wednesday, his voice apologetic. Listen, Chelsea Dillon's been talking to people. I want you to know I don't agree with his approach here, but he seems to really believe you need his help. Just wanted to give you a heads up. I thanked him for the call and felt something shift. Uncle Robert had always been perceptive, the one family member who'd asked me real questions about my life instead of making assumptions. If he could see through Dylan's campaign, others might too. That evening I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine and watched the city lights flicker on. My phone had finally gone quiet. I thought about Dylan's proposal, about his assumption that I'd need him, that I'd want him involved in something I'd built from nothing, while he was busy telling everyone I'd never amount to anything. What Dylan didn't know, what he couldn't possibly understand, was that his rejection had been the first domino in a chain that led me here. His dismissal had pushed me to the bank. His doubt had made me more careful, more thorough, more determined to prove I could do this without anyone's blessing. And now, his attempts to undermine me would do nothing but show everyone exactly who he was. I wouldn't have to push a single domino after this. I just had to let them fall on their own. 3 days after Dylan started his campaign, Mum showed up at my apartment without calling first. I opened the door to find her standing in the hallway, holding her purse with both hands, looking smaller somehow than she had at the restaurant. She was alone, which hadn't happened in years. Dylan or Aunt Diane were always with her, like she needed an entourage to visit her own daughter. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice uncertain. I stepped aside and she walked past me into the living room, still clutching her purse. She sat on the edge of my couch like she might need to leave quickly, and for a long moment she just looked around my apartment, taking in the books on the shelves, the plants by the window, the framed photo of Dad on the side table. "I should have come alone before now," she said finally. "I should have done a lot of things differently." I sat in the chair across from her and waited. I'd learned that Mum needed time to work up to what she really wanted to say, that pushing her just made her retreat. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope yellowed at the edges and sealed with tape that had gone brittle with age. Her hand shook slightly as she held it. "Your father gave this to me 8 years ago, 2 weeks before he died. He made me promise to give it to you when the time was right. He said I'd know when that was." She looked down at the envelope. "I think that time is now. I should have given it to you sooner, but I was afraid of what it might say. Afraid it might confirm things I didn't want to admit about how I treated you." She held it out and I took it, feeling the weight of 8 years in that small rectangle of paper. My name was written on the front in Dad's handwriting, slightly shaky but unmistakably his. Chelsea Marie Little. The sight of it made my throat tight. Mum stood up, still clutching her purse. "I'll go. You should read that alone. But Chelsea, I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not believing in you when you needed me to. I'm sorry for letting Dylan speak for me. I'm sorry for all of it." She left before I could respond, pulling the door closed quietly behind her. I sat there holding the envelope, almost afraid to open it. Finally, I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out 2 folded pieces of paper. The first was a letter in Dad's handwriting dated 6 months before he died. My quiet one, it began, and I had to stop reading for a moment to steady myself. That's what he used to call me. His quiet one. By the time you read this, you'll have proven everyone wrong, including yourself. I know you don't believe in your own strength yet, but I see it. I've always seen it. You think being quiet means being weak, but you're wrong about that. You're not quiet because you have nothing to say. You're quiet because you're watching, learning, understanding things the loud people miss. I watched you perfect that bean soup recipe when you were 8 years old. Do you remember? You wanted to boil the beans just once, get it done, fast. But I taught you to boil them 3 times, change the water each time, let the flavours develop slowly. You were so patient even as a child. You understood that good things take time, that rushing ruins everything. That soup was never bland Chelsea. It was honest, just like you. Your mother and brother don't understand this yet. They think success has to be loud, has to announce itself. They'll dismiss you and underestimate you, and that will hurt. But their blindness is not your failure. Keep building quietly. Keep being patient. When they finally see what you've created, it won't be because you demanded their attention. It will be because your work speaks louder than their doubts ever could. I'm leaving you something in my will, but I wanted you to have part of it early before I'm gone. Not because I think you need my permission, but because I know you'll use it right. You'll plant it carefully and tend it patiently and turn it into something beautiful. Not everyone has to announce when they're building something real. Sometimes the best foundations are laid in silence. Be proud of who you are, my quiet one. The world needs people who watch and listen and build with integrity. Don't let anyone make you feel small for refusing to be loud. I love you. I've always been proud of you. And wherever I am when you read this, I'm still proud. Dad. My hands were shaking by the time I finished reading. I looked at the second piece of paper and realised it was a copy of an amendment to his will dated the same day as the letter. It outlined a trust fund set up in my name to be released when I turned 30. The amount made my breath catch. It was exactly what I'd used as the initial investment for Hartwell and Stone, the mysterious inheritance that had arrived 6 months after I'd secured the bank loan, allowing me to pay off the high-interest debt and actually have operating capital. I'd assumed it was just standard inheritance money divided equally between Dylan and me. I'd never known it was specifically intended for me set aside years before Dad died, released early because he'd wanted me to have it when I needed it most. He'd known. Somehow he'd known I'd try to build something, known I'd face resistance, known I'd need help but wouldn't ask for it. So he'd given it to me quietly, the same way I did everything else. I sat there in my living room holding the letter and the document, and for the first time in 8 years, I let myself cry. Not the silent tears I'd shed at his funeral, trying to hold myself together for Mum's sake. Not the quick, frustrated tears I'd cried alone after family gatherings where I felt invisible. Real crying, the kind that shakes your whole body and empties you out and somehow fills you back up again. I cried because my father had seen me. Really seen me. Not the quiet girl everyone else overlooked, but the patient builder who understood that foundations matter more than facades. I cried because he'd believed in me when I barely believed in myself. And I cried because he'd given me permission to be exactly who I was without apology or explanation. After the tears stopped, I got up and found the old recipe card in my purse, the one I'd carried to the restaurant without knowing why. I laid it next to Dad's letter on my coffee table. 2 pieces of paper years apart saying the same thing in different ways. Be patient. Be honest. Build something real. I didn't know it yet, sitting there with swollen eyes and Dad's words still echoing in my head, but something had shifted. I'd spent so long trying to earn my family's approval, trying to prove I deserved to take up space. But Dad had already given me everything I needed. Not money, though that had helped. Not advice on how to change myself. Just permission to be exactly who I already was, to build quietly and patiently and honestly, and to trust that would be enough. And it turned out it was more than enough. It was everything. The LinkedIn message arrived 2 days after Mum's visit from someone named Jennifer Ross, whose profile showed she worked in market research for hospitality brands. The subject line was simple, about your brother Dylan. I almost deleted it. I'd gotten enough messages since the restaurant news spread some genuine, and some from people suddenly interested in networking now that I had something they wanted. But something made me open it. Ms. Little, I hope this message doesn't seem intrusive. I saw the article about Hartwell and Stone and recognised your brother's name in the family photo. I worked with Dylan 3 years ago on what he called a consulting project for a boutique hotel group. I'm reaching out because I think you should know what kind of person you're dealing with in case you're considering his business proposals. If you're willing to talk, I'd appreciate the chance to explain. My number is below. I stared at the message for a long time before calling her. She answered on the second ring, her voice professional, but carrying an edge of something bitter. Thank you for calling, she said. I wasn't sure you would. Tell me what happened with Dylan. She took a breath, and I heard her settling in like she'd been waiting years to tell this story to someone who might actually listen. 3 years ago, I was hired by a hotel group to analyse their food and beverage operations. They wanted to know why their restaurants were underperforming compared to competitors. I spent 4 months on the research, conducting surveys, analysing financial data, interviewing staff and customers. I developed a complete strategy for repositioning their dining offerings. And Dylan, he was dating someone in their corporate office. She introduced him as a restaurant consultant, and he started sitting in on meetings. He was charming, asked good questions, made himself seem invaluable. I thought he was genuinely interested in the work. I shared my preliminary findings with him, asked for feedback. He made a few surface-level suggestions that I incorporated, nothing substantial. I could already see where this was going. He took credit for your work. All of it. He scheduled a presentation with the executives while I was out of town at a conference, delivered my entire analysis as if it was his. When I came back and found out, I tried to speak up. I had documentation, emails, everything. But he'd already poisoned the well. Told them I was difficult to work with, that I was jealous of his relationship with the client, that I was trying to claim credit for his ideas. Her voice went flat. They believed him. I was quietly let go from the project. No formal termination, just gradually excluded from meetings until my contract wasn't renewed. Did you try to fight it? I consulted a lawyer, but Dylan was careful. He never put anything in writing. It was all verbal, agreements, casual conversations, and he had leverage through his girlfriend. It would have been my word against his, and he'd already established the narrative that I was vindictive. I let it go, but I've watched my career stall since then. Word gets around in this industry. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. You said this was a pattern. There were others? At least 3 that I know of. I started asking around after it happened to me. There's a woman named Patricia who worked with him on restaurant branding 2 years before me. Same story, different details. A man named David who collaborated with him on a franchise expansion proposal. And Marcus Chen, though his situation was different. My breath caught at the name. Marcus Chen? What happened with Marcus? I don't know all the details, but I was told he tried to warn people about Dylan years ago, said Dylan had sabotaged a business partnership. Dylan spread rumours that Marcus was bitter about a deal going south, that he couldn't handle failure professionally. Made him sound unstable. After that, most people in the industry avoided Marcus. The room felt too small, suddenly the air too thin. Marcus Chen. I hadn't let myself think that name in 10 years. Jennifer, thank you for telling me this. Can I ask why reach out now? Why not before? She was quiet for a moment. Because I saw that photo of your family at the restaurant opening. I saw the way you were standing, slightly apart from everyone else, the way your brother had his arm around your mother, but not around you, and I thought, he's probably been doing this to you your whole life. Maybe you needed to know it wasn't just you. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and let myself remember Marcus. We'd met 10 years ago at a food industry networking event, both of us young and ambitious and full of ideas about what restaurants could be. We'd started talking about opening a place together, something small and intimate that focused on honest food and genuine hospitality. We'd spent months planning developing concepts, scouting locations. Dylan had seemed supportive at first, came to our planning meetings, offered suggestions, acted interested. Then he'd started pulling me aside, expressing concerns. Marcus is trying to position himself as the primary owner. He's already talking to investors without including you. He's going to push you out once the real work starts. I'd confronted Marcus about it, and he'd looked genuinely confused. He showed me emails proving we'd always been equal partners, that he'd included me in every conversation. But Dylan had been insistent, brought up small things that seemed suspicious once he framed them that way. The way Marcus had suggested using his accountant. The way he'd mentioned a lawyer friend who could draw up partnership papers. Eventually, I'd walked away convinced Marcus was trying to manipulate me, convinced I couldn't trust my own judgment. Marcus had tried to reach out a few times after that, but I'd ignored him. I'd believed my brother over the one person who'd actually seen potential in me. The betrayal of it hit me like a physical blow. Dylan hadn't just dismissed my abilities or stolen credit for my work. He'd actively destroyed the one partnership, the one relationship that might have helped me succeed years earlier. He'd isolated me, made me doubt myself, ensured I'd be alone when I finally tried to build something. My phone rang that evening, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Chelsea. The voice was familiar even after 10 years warm and slightly uncertain. It's Marcus Chen. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I saw the article about Hartwell and Stone. I heard you finally built that restaurant. I closed my eyes, years of misunderstanding and manipulation, crystallizing into painful clarity. Marcus. God, I'm so sorry. For what? For believing him, for walking away, for everything. There was a long pause. Then Marcus said quietly, I always knew you would do it. Build something real. I just wish we could have done it together. We met for coffee 3 days later at a place downtown that neither of us had history with. I got there early and watched through the window as Marcus walked up the street, and I barely recognized him. 10 years had changed him in ways that went beyond the grey at his temples or the lines around his eyes. He moved differently now, slower and more deliberate, like someone who'd learned that rushing only gets you to the wrong places faster. He saw me through the window and smiled, and that at least was the same. Warm and genuine and a little uncertain, like he wasn't quite sure he was welcome, but hoped he might be. Thank you for meeting me, he said as he sat down across from me. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure either, I admitted, but I owed you at least a conversation. More than that, actually. He shook his head. You don't owe me anything, Chelsea. I called because I wanted you to know the truth, not because I expected anything from you. We ordered coffee and sat in the kind of silence that's only comfortable between people who used to know each other well. Finally, Marcus spoke. I moved to Seattle about 6 months after you walked away from our partnership. Took a job with a tech startup doing food delivery logistics. It wasn't what I wanted, but I needed distance from everything that had happened here. I got married 4 years ago, divorced 2 years after that. No kids, thank God. She was a good person, we just wanted different things. He paused, turning his coffee cup in slow circles. I came back last month. My mum's getting older, and I wanted to be closer. Then I saw the article about your restaurant, and I couldn't believe it. Not that you'd succeeded, I always knew you would, but that you'd done it alone. Director. Marcus, what Dylan told me about you trying to steal the concept about cutting me out of the partnership. None of it was true. We were equal partners in everything. I have the emails still if you want to see them. The contracts we drafted. Everything showed 50-50 ownership shared decision-making. His voice stayed level, but I could hear the old hurt underneath. When you accused me of trying to push you out, I didn't understand where it was coming from. Then I started hearing rumours that Dylan was telling people I was unstable, that I'd tried to sabotage you out of jealousy. By the time I figured out what he'd done, the damage was done. I'm so sorry, I said, and my voice cracked on the words. I should have trusted you. I should have questioned what he was saying instead of just believing him. You believed your brother. That's not a character flaw, Chelsea. That's what family is supposed to be. He leaned back in his chair and some of the tension left his shoulders. I don't want to complicate your life. I just wanted you to know what really happened, that it wasn't you. Your judgment was fine. You were just working with false information. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup, needing something solid to hold on to. I spent a decade thinking I couldn't trust my own instincts about people. Every business decision I made, every partnership I considered, I second-guessed myself constantly because I was so sure I'd been wrong about you. And now I'm still learning to trust myself again. It's not something that fixes itself just because I know the truth. Marcus nodded slowly. Then let me earn it. Your trust, no pressure, no expectations. Just coffee sometimes. Let me prove that not everyone is Dylan. Something in my chest loosened slightly. Coffee sometimes. I think I can do that. We finished our drinks and he suggested walking for a while. The afternoon was cool, but clear, the kind of autumn day that makes you remember why you live in a city despite all its complications. Without really planning it, we ended up on the street where we'd first talked about opening a restaurant together in a little cafe that had since closed and reopened as a bookstore. We stood outside looking at it, both of us remembering what used to be there. Marcus didn't say anything about the past, but I could feel it hanging between us, all those what-ifs and might-have-beens. What if I'd trusted him? What if we'd opened that restaurant together? What if Dylan hadn't poisoned everything he touched? Do you ever think about how different things could have been? I asked. Sometimes, but then I remember that you built something remarkable anyway. Maybe you needed to do it alone. Maybe that was always how it was supposed to go. That's a very generous way of looking at it. He smiled. I've had 10 years to practice being generous. It beats being bitter. We walked a few more blocks and I found myself laughing at something he said about his tech job, some absurd story about a CEO who thought artisanal algorithms were a real thing. It was genuine laughter, the kind that comes from your stomach and surprises you with its force. I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed like that. Marcus walked me back to where I'd parked, and at my car he squeezed my hand gently. Thank you for meeting me. I know it wasn't easy. Thank you for not giving up on the truth, I said, even when no one was listening. He walked away toward the bus stop and I sat in my car for a moment watching him go. I felt lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying something heavy without realising it and had finally set it down. I didn't notice Dylan's car parked across the street. Didn't see him sitting there watching Marcus and me talk, watching me laugh, watching the gentle way Marcus had touched my hand. I didn't see his knuckles white on the steering wheel or the way he pulled out his phone and started typing messages, then deleting them, then typing again. I didn't know that my brother was sitting there making calls, setting things in motion that he thought would save his reputation, but would actually be the thing that destroyed it. I didn't know he'd stopped caring about the difference. I just drove home still thinking about coffee and second chances and the strange relief of finally knowing the truth. I didn't hear about Dylan's situation directly from him. I heard it from Thomas, who heard it from a supplier who'd been talking to other restaurant owners in the network. Apparently, my brother had been running a consulting business for the past 2 years, telling clients he was the strategic advisor behind Hartwell and Stone's success. He'd been collecting fees, substantial ones, promising to replicate our model for their establishments. Thomas told me this over the coffee in my office, his expression carefully neutral. I thought you should know. People are asking questions about whether we endorse him or if this is an official partnership. We don't, and it isn't, I said. He has no connection to this business beyond being related to me. That's what I told them. But Chelsea, he's apparently collected significant money from at least 3 clients. One of them, a man named Robert Hendricks, who owns 2 small restaurants in the suburbs, has been asking to tour our facilities for months. Dylan keeps making excuses. I set down my coffee cup carefully. How much money are we talking about? Hendricks paid him $35,000 over 6 months for what Dylan called comprehensive consulting services. Menu development, operational strategy, branding, guidance, all supposedly based on how you built this place. The number made me feel sick, not because it was enormous in the scheme of restaurant investments, but because it represented someone's hope, someone's dream that my brother was selling them like it was his to sell. Hendricks got suspicious after that dinner when you were revealed as the owner, Thomas continued. He'd been asking Dylan for weeks why his sister wasn't involved in the consulting if she was the actual brain behind the operation. Dylan kept saying you were too busy with other projects. After the dinner, Hendricks hired a lawyer to verify Dylan's credentials. And found nothing. Public business records show no connection between Dylan and Hartwell and Stone. No employment, no partnership, no consulting contract. Nothing. Hendricks is demanding a full refund. I spent the rest of that afternoon thinking about those 3 restaurant owners who'd trusted Dylan, who'd handed over their money believing he could help them succeed. I thought about calling them, offering to consult for free, trying to make up for what my brother had stolen from them. But Thomas advised against it. That makes you liable for his actions, he said, and it suggests we had some connection to his business practices. The best thing you can do is stay completely separate from whatever happens next. What happened next came in pieces over the following 2 weeks. Mum called crying, saying Dylan had to sell his watch collection, the expensive pieces he'd been so proud of. Aunt Diane mentioned that Dylan had broken his car lease early and was driving some old sedan now. A cousin texted asking if I knew Dylan was moving to a smaller apartment across town. The picture came together slowly. Dylan had spent that consulting money as fast as he'd collected it. The luxury car lease he couldn't actually afford. The expensive apartment in the fashionable neighbourhood. The designer clothes he wore to industry events. All of it had been funded by money he'd taken from people who thought they were investing in expertise he didn't have. Even selling everything he apparently came up short. Mum mentioned he'd asked to borrow money and she'd said no, which must have killed her. Aunt Diane had refused him too. The golden child was suddenly without his guilt. Hendricks didn't sue. According to the network gossip Thomas picked up, a lawyer had advised him that litigation would cost more than $35,000 and take years. But Hendricks did warn people. He made calls, sent emails, told his story to anyone in the restaurant industry who would listen. The whisper network in this business is tight and unforgiving. I started noticing the absence of Dylan's name in places it used to appear. Industry newsletters that had quoted him. Event attendee lists where he'd been a regular. The kind of invisibility I'd lived with my whole life was suddenly swallowing him whole, and he had no idea how to exist inside it. Marcus and I had coffee again during this time, and I told him what was happening. He listened without interrupting, then said something that stuck with me. The thing about people like Dylan is they build their whole identity on a foundation of lies. When one piece crumbles, everything goes with it. They never learned how to stand on solid ground. Should I feel bad for him? I asked. Because I don't. I know I should. He's my brother, but I just feel empty about the whole thing. You don't owe him your sympathy, Chelsea, especially not when he's facing consequences he earned. On a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks after I first heard about the consulting scheme, Thomas called me at home. Dylan is here. He's asking to see you. He looks rough. I drove to the restaurant, even though part of me wanted to stay away. When I walked in, Dylan was sitting at the bar and Thomas was right. He looked rough, unshaven, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't been sleeping. He saw me and stood up too quickly, nearly knocking over the water glass in front of him. "Chelsea, thank God. I need to talk to you." I didn't sit down. "What do you want, Dylan?" "I need help. I need money. Just a loan, I'll pay you back. Hendrix is threatening to go public with everything if I don't refund him, and I'm short 18,000. If this gets out, I'm done. No one in this industry will ever work with me again." I looked at my brother, this man who'd spent our entire lives making me feel small, who'd stolen credit from talented people, who'd destroyed my partnership with Marcus, who'd sold lies to desperate restaurant owners, using my success as his credential. I looked at him and felt absolutely nothing. "No," I said simply. "Chelsea, please. I'm your brother. Family helps family. Family believes family. Family supports family. Family doesn't tell their sister to sit quietly while rich people are talking. You made your choices, Dylan. Now you get to live with them." I walked toward my office and didn't look back. Behind me, I heard Dylan start to say something else, but Maria stepped between us, her 62-year-old frame suddenly taking up a lot of space. "I think you should leave now," she said, her voice carrying that particular authority that comes from 4 decades of handling difficult situations with grace. I closed my office door and sat at my desk, hands shaking slightly. Through the window, I watched Dylan leave the restaurant, his shoulders hunched, his expensive shoes scuffing the sidewalk. This should have felt like victory, but it just felt like the end of something that had been dying for years. Aunt Diane called me 3 days after Dylan showed up at the restaurant. Her voice on the phone was different than I'd ever heard it, softer somehow, without that sharp edge she usually carried. "Chelsea, I need to talk to you. Just you and me, no one else. Can we meet somewhere neutral? Not your restaurant, not my house. Somewhere we can talk honestly." We agreed on a diner halfway between our places, the kind of spot with worn booths and coffee that tastes like it's been sitting too long, but somehow that's part of its charm. I got there first and watched her walk in, and I was struck by how much older she looked than I remembered. Not just aged, but tired, like she'd been carrying something heavy for a long time. She slid into the booth across from me and ordered coffee without looking at the menu. We sat in silence until the waitress brought our cups and left. "I owe you an explanation," Diane said finally. "Not an excuse. I can't excuse what I've done, but an explanation for why I've treated you the way I have all these years." I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup and waited. I'd learned that Aunt Diane needed to work up to things her own way, and pushing her only made her retreat behind that cold facade. "You reminded me of myself at your age," she said, staring into her coffee like she might find the right words there. "Quiet, underestimated, too kind to fight dirty. I was 23 when I came up with a design for a commercial building downtown. Showed it to my boss, a man I trusted. He presented it to the client as his own work. When I tried to speak up, he made me look unstable, unprofessional. I never got credit for that design, and it launched his career while mine stalled." She looked up at me, then her eyes harder than I'd ever seen them. I watched my softness, my tendency to trust people, destroy my chances. I became bitter and sharp because I thought that's what survival looked like. When I looked at you, I saw that same softness, that same willingness to believe the best in people. It terrified me. "So you decided to toughen me up by being cruel." The words came out more gentle than I expected. "I thought if I criticized you, pushed, you made you prove yourself constantly, you'd learn to fight back sooner. You developed the armor I'd had to build too late. I was trying to save you from becoming me." She laughed bitterly. "But I was wrong. You didn't need to be like me. You needed to be stronger than me, and you were. You built something real while staying soft where it mattered. I just hurt you for no good reason. I took a sip of coffee, giving myself time to process. You could have just told me this. You could have been honest instead of cruel. I know, but by the time I realised my approach was wrong, I'd been doing it for so long, I didn't know how to stop. Every time I wanted to say something kind, something supportive, I'd freeze up. So I just kept being hard on you because at least that was familiar. She reached into her purse and pulled out a piece of paper, old and worn at the edges. When you applied for your first business loan 5 years ago, the bank called me. They'd found my name in some industry database and wanted a reference from someone who knew you professionally. I told them you were the most dedicated, detail-oriented, honest person I'd ever worked with in the food service industry. I stared at her. That anonymous reference letter, that was you? I knew you'd make it. I've been tracking your success for years, reading every review, checking your financial reports when they became public record. I just didn't know how to tell you I was proud, without explaining why I'd been so cruel first. And I was too much of a coward to have that conversation. The waitress came by to refill our cups, and we both sat in silence until she left. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to be angry, wanted to throw all those years of criticism and dismissal back in her face. But another part of me understood something about cycles of hurt, about how we sometimes damage the people we're trying to protect. Diane pulled a small box from her purse and slid it across the table. This belonged to your father. It disappeared after the funeral, and everyone assumed it had been misplaced in the chaos. But I took it. I told myself I was keeping it safe until you were ready, but really, I was just too afraid to give it to you and face what it meant. I opened the box with shaking hands. Inside was a simple silver band masculine, and understated with an inscription inside that I had to hold up to the light to read, for the quiet one who sees everything. Dad wore this. My voice came out barely above a whisper. Every day. He had it made about a year before you were born. Your mother always thought the inscription was strange, but he told her it was a reminder to himself. Later, after you were born and grew into this observant, quiet child, I realised he'd had it made for you. He was waiting for the right time to give it to you, but then he got sick so fast. He told me to give it to you at the funeral, but I couldn't. I thought you'd just lose it or not understand its value. So I kept it telling myself I was protecting you from yourself. I slipped the ring onto my right hand. It fit perfectly on my index finger, like it had been sized specifically for me. Maybe it had. Maybe Dad had known, somehow had planned for this moment, even knowing he wouldn't be there to see it. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, despite the years of cruelty and criticism, she'd kept this safe for me. She'd written that reference letter. She'd been watching in her broken way, trying to support me from a distance, because she didn't know how to do it up close. Diane's eyes were bright with tears she wouldn't let fall. I'm sorry, Chelsea, for all of it. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to hear it from me. I looked down at the ring on my finger, this piece of my father that had been waiting all these years to find its way home. Then I looked back at Diane and asked the question that had been forming since she started talking. Does Mother know about the ring, about the reference letter, about any of this? Diane's face went very still. No. And there's a reason for that. Your mother has her own story to tell you, Chelsea. But it's not mine to share. I spent that evening at Mom's house searching through Dad's old belongings that she'd boxed up and stored in the guest room. She was out at a book club meeting, so I had the place to myself and the freedom to dig through memories without anyone watching. I found his journals in the third box, leather-bound notebooks where he'd recorded thoughts and observations about life, family, work. I'd never known he kept journals. Mum had probably never looked through them, just packed them away with everything else after he died. I flipped through pages until I found an entry from when I was 12 years old. His handwriting was stronger then, before the illness, each word carefully formed. Chelsea doesn't speak much, but she notices everything. Today, at dinner, she was quiet while everyone else talked over each other. but I watched her eyes. She saw that her brother was lying about finishing his homework. She noticed her mother was upset about something, but hiding it. She observed the way I kept rubbing my left shoulder, where the pain has been getting worse. She sees all of it, processes all of it, and chooses when to speak and when to stay silent. The world dismisses quiet people as weak. They assume silence means nothing's happening, that there's no depth or intelligence at work. They don't understand that the quiet ones are the ones watching, learning, building, understanding while everyone else is performing. When quiet people finally move, everyone else is already 10 steps behind because they never saw it coming. Chelsea will do something remarkable someday. I just hope I'm around to see it. I had to set the journal down for a moment, my vision blurring with tears. He'd seen me, really seen me even back then. Not as the disappointing, quiet daughter, but as someone with her own kind of strength. I kept reading. There were other entries about me scattered through the years. Observations about how I learned to cook by watching rather than asking questions. Notes about my friendship choices. How I gravitated toward people who listened more than they talked. A comment about how I'd handled a bully in middle school, not by confronting him, but by quietly befriending everyone around him until he had no audience for his cruelty. In every entry, Dad saw my silence not as a weakness, but as a strategy, a way of moving through the world that had its own power. He understood something about me that no one else in the family ever had. The next morning, I called Diane back. "You said Dad wanted me to have the ring when I graduated college. Why then specifically?" There was a long pause. "He said that's when you'd be making decisions about who you wanted to become as an adult. He thought you might need a reminder that being yourself was enough, that you didn't need to change to succeed. He was worried you'd try to become louder, more aggressive, more like Dylan, because that's what the world rewards. But you kept it from me because you thought I was too soft. I kept it because I thought you'd wear it like a security blanket, like permission to stay small and quiet and unambitious. I see now that you never needed security, Chelsea. You needed acknowledgement. You needed someone to say that your way of being in the world was valid and powerful. Your father knew that. I didn't." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the ring on my finger. I'd been wearing it constantly since Diane gave it to me, this tangible connection to the one person who truly understood me. But it meant more than just connection. It meant validation. Permission, like Diane said, but not permission to be weak. Permission to be exactly who I already was. I'd spent 5 years building Hartwell and Stone through a holding company, keeping my name off public documents, maintaining privacy and protection. I told myself it was smart business, that it kept my personal and professional lives separate. But that wasn't the whole truth. The real truth was that I'd been protecting myself from judgment, from the possibility that my family would find some way to dismiss or diminish what I'd built. But silence had become its own kind of prison. Not speaking up, not claiming my work publicly, not standing in the full light of what I'd accomplished. I was still making myself smaller, still protecting other people's comfort at the expense of my own visibility. I opened my laptop and pulled up the trademark paperwork I'd been working on for the second location. For 5 years, Hartwell and Stone had been registered to a holding company. Clean, anonymous, safe. I changed the registration. Chelsea Marie Little, founder and majority owner. I uploaded the new documents and watched the progress bar creep across the screen. Then I opened the expansion permits for the 2 new locations we'd been planning. Thomas and I had been working on these for months, but I'd been holding back on filing them, waiting for the right time. I filled in my name on every line that asked for the owner, not the holding company, not a business entity. My actual name in my own handwriting on the scanned documents. By tomorrow morning, it would all be public record. Anyone who searched business registrations would find my name attached to Hartwell and Stone. The invisible daughter was about to become very visible, and there would be no taking it back. My hand shook slightly as I clicked submit on the expansion permits. The documents uploaded, processing bars, filling one by one, making it official. I was claiming my work publicly, announcing to the world that I'd built this, that I was continuing to build it, that I wasn't hiding anymore. My phone buzzed with a text message. Marcus. Just 3 words. I'm proud of you. I stared at the message confused. I hadn't told him about filing the paperwork. Hadn't mentioned I was even considering making my ownership public. We'd had coffee twice more since that first meeting. Easy conversations about nothing in particular, rebuilding trust slowly. But I hadn't shared this decision with anyone. I texted back, "How did you know?" His response came quickly. "I didn't know what you were doing. I just knew you were ready to do something. I could hear it in your voice yesterday when we talked. You sounded different, like you'd stopped apologizing for existing." I looked down at the ring on my finger at Dad's inscription catching the morning light, for the quiet one who sees everything. Maybe the power in being quiet wasn't about hiding or protecting myself. Maybe it was about observing, understanding, and then acting from a place of certainty rather than reaction. I'd watched my family for 36 years. Watched Dylan perform and manipulate. Watched Mum enable and ignore. Watched Aunt Diane hurt people because she'd been hurt first. I'd seen all of it, processed all of it, and built something real while they were busy maintaining appearances. Now they were going to see me too. Not because I needed their approval, but because I'd finally stopped needing their permission. 2 weeks after I filed the paperwork making my ownership public, Thomas forwarded me an email invitation. Dylan had organised what he was calling a press conference at a rented event space downtown. The subject line read, "Announcing new consulting ventures and strategic partnerships in the restaurant industry." "Should we be concerned about this?" Thomas asked when he called. "No," I said, looking at the ring on my finger. "Let him talk. The truth has a way of speaking for itself." The event was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. I didn't attend, but Marcus did. He texted me halfway through, "This is bad. He's making claims that anyone can verify are false. I'll fill you in later." That evening, Marcus came to my apartment with takeout and a look of stunned disbelief. "Chelsea, I've seen people self-destruct before, but this was spectacular. Your brother stood up in front of 20 people, including several local food bloggers and at least one financial journalist, and just lied. Confidently, elaborately, provably lied." What did he say? He claimed he's been the strategic mind behind multiple successful restaurants, with Hartwell and Stone being his flagship example. He talked about investor relationships he'd cultivated, expansion strategies he'd developed, financial milestones he'd achieved. He gave specific numbers, Chelsea. Revenue figures, opening dates, investor names. And they were wrong. Completely wrong. He said Hartwell and Stone opened in 2018. It was 2019. He claimed annual revenue of 3.7 million. Your public filings show 2.1 million, which is still impressive, but nowhere near what he stated. He mentioned investors by name. People I know for a fact have never been involved with your restaurant. It was like watching someone build an elaborate house of cards in a wind tunnel. I sat down at my kitchen table, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. Someone's going to fact-check him. Someone already did. There was a woman in the audience, Sarah Kim, writes for the Business Journal. I saw her typing notes the whole time, and her expression got more skeptical with every claim he made. After the event ended, she went straight to her laptop. The article published online the next morning. Local consultant caught fabricating business credentials. Sarah Kim had done exactly what any good journalist would do. She checked public business records, found my name as the sole founder and majority owner of Hartwell and Stone, discovered that Dylan's name appeared nowhere in any official documentation. She'd called Thomas for comment. Thomas had been perfect. Dylan Little is not and has never been affiliated with our business operations in any capacity. He is the sibling of our owner, but has no role in the company's management strategy or financial decisions. Sarah called me directly that afternoon. I'd been expecting it and had my statement ready. "Ms. Little, I'm writing about your brother's claims regarding Hartwell and Stone. Do you have any comment?" I don't comment on claims made by others, I said calmly. Our business records are public and speak for themselves. Anyone interested in the facts can verify them through official channels. And so you're confirming that your brother has no affiliation with your restaurant? I'm confirming that our business records accurately reflect all ownership management and consulting relationships. If someone's name doesn't appear in those records, there's a reason. The article was thorough and damning. Sarah had interviewed 2 of Dylan's former clients, both of whom confirmed they'd paid him for consulting services based on his claims about Hartwell and Stone. She'd verified that every specific fact he'd stated at the press conference was either false or significantly exaggerated. She'd even found testimonials from other consultants in the industry who'd noticed Dylan making questionable claims at networking events. The piece didn't editorialize. It didn't need to. It simply laid out the facts one after another, letting readers draw their own conclusions. The conclusion was obvious. Dylan Little had built a consulting career on fabricated credentials and stolen credibility. The story spread quickly. Food bloggers picked it up. Industry newsletters reprinted portions of it. By Friday afternoon, Dylan's name was trending in local restaurant circles, and not in the way he'd hoped. Mum called, crying, "Chelsea, did you see what they're saying about your brother? Can't you do something? Tell them he made a mistake, that he was confused?" "He wasn't confused, Mum. He lied, deliberately and repeatedly. I'm not going to lie for him." Aunt Diane called too, her voice tight. "I know Dylan has made mistakes, but this public humiliation seems excessive. Can't you ask them to retract the article?" "Retract the truth? No, Aunt Diane. I can't and won't." What struck me most was that I felt no satisfaction in Dylan's downfall. I'd imagined for years what it might feel like to see him face consequences, to watch his carefully constructed image crumble. I thought it might feel like justice or vindication. Instead, it just felt sad and inevitable, like watching someone trip over a wire they'd spent years stringing across their own path. Saturday night, close to 11, my doorman called up. "Ms. Little, there's a Dylan Little here to see you. He's quite insistent, and to be honest, he appears to be intoxicated. Should I send him away?" I looked down at the ring on my finger at Dad's inscription, reminding me that I saw everything that I'd always seen, everything, including this moment probably from the first time Dylan dismissed me at a family dinner. "No," I said quietly. "Let him come up." I opened my door before he could knock. Dylan stood in my hallway unshaven and swaying slightly, his eyes red and unfocused. He'd been drinking probably for hours based on the smell. His expensive shirt was wrinkled and had a stain on the collar. This was what desperation looked like when it finally caught up with performance. "Chelsea?" My name came out slurred. "I need to talk to you. I need you to fix this. You can fix this. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them I was involved, that the records are incomplete. You're the owner. They'll believe you." "Come inside, Dylan," I said. "But you need to sit down before you fall down." He stumbled past me into my apartment, and I closed the door quietly behind him. This conversation had been coming for 36 years. It was time to finally have it. Dylan collapsed onto my couch like someone had cut his strings. For a moment, he just sat there, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. Then he started crying. Not the careful, controlled emotion he'd sometimes displayed at family events when he wanted sympathy. Real, crying, ugly, and desperate, and stripped of all performance. "I'm sorry," he said through the tears. "God, Chelsea, I'm so sorry. I ruined everything. Everything, my career, my reputation, my relationships. I took credit from people who trusted me. I lied to clients who believed in me. I destroyed your partnership with Marcus because I was jealous that someone saw your potential before I did." I sat in the chair across from him and waited. He needed to get this out, all of it, before we could have any real conversation. "I sabotaged you with Marcus because you two had something real, something I've never had. You were building something together based on actual respect and talent, and I couldn't stand it. So I told you he was trying to steal from you, and I told him you didn't trust him, and I watched it fall apart. He looked up at me, his face blotchy and red. I've spent my entire life standing on other people to make myself look taller. Jennifer, Patricia, David, Marcus, you. I took and took and took because I didn't know how to build anything myself. Why? The question came out quieter than I intended. Why did you need to tear everyone else down? Because I don't know how to be anything except better than everyone else. And I'm not better. I never was. I'm not smarter than you, not more talented, not more hardworking. I just learnt early that if I was loud enough and confident enough, people would believe whatever I told them. But the truth is, I'm empty, Chelsea. I don't have anything real inside. No skills, no integrity, no actual value. Just performance. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw something I'd never allowed myself to see before. He wasn't evil. He wasn't even malicious, not really. He was a man who'd never faced real failure, never learned to build anything from scratch, never been taught that value comes from what you create, not from what you take. Mum and Dad had cushioned every fall, praised every mediocre achievement, told him he was special until he believed his existence alone made him superior. And when reality didn't match that belief, he'd built an elaborate facade to maintain the illusion. Now the facade had crumbled, and he had no idea who he was underneath. What do you want from me, Dylan? I don't know. Help. Forgiveness. A way to fix this. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. Will you tell people I worked for you? Just something small, just enough so I can start over? No. He flinched like I'd hit him. Please, Chelsea, I'm begging you. No, I said again, but softer this time. Because that would be another lie, and lies are what got you here. If you want to start over, it has to be with truth. After he left, stumbling out of my apartment, still drunk and desperate, I sat alone in the dark and felt something inside me shift. I'd expected to feel victorious, satisfied, vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow and confused. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. It's late, I said when he answered. Is this okay? For you, always? What's wrong? I told him about Dylan showing up drunk about his breakdown and his admission about the emptiness I'd seen in him. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to let him drown in the consequences he earned. But another part of me just sees someone who was never taught how to be a real person. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Can I tell you something my therapist told me after my divorce? Forgiveness isn't about letting people off the hook. It's about teaching them to face what they've done. Real accountability is harder than revenge, because it requires the person to actually change, to actually do the work. Revenge is quick and satisfying, but it doesn't transform anyone. Accountability does, if they're willing to do it. So what does accountability look like here? That's not for me to decide. That's between you and your brother. But whatever you choose, make sure it's about his growth, not his comfort. Make sure it costs him something real. I spent the rest of the night thinking about what Marcus had said about the difference between revenge and accountability, about what might actually change someone versus what would just make them bitter. By the time the sun came up, I knew what I had to do. I called toward Dylan at 8 a.m. He sounded terrible, hungover, and defeated. Come to my apartment at noon, I said, sober. We're going to talk about what happens next. He arrived exactly at noon, showered and shaved, but still looking hollowed out. I let him in and we sat at my kitchen table with coffee between us. I'm going to offer you something, I said. Not forgiveness. I'm not there yet, and I might never be. But a chance. One chance to learn how to build something instead of taking from others. He leaned forward, desperate hope flickering in his eyes. You can work at Hartwell and Stone, starting at the bottom, not as my brother, not as someone special, but as an employee, minimum wage. You'll start in the dish pit. Then you'll learn every single job in that restaurant. Prep, cook line, cook host, server, bartender. You'll learn what it actually takes to run a restaurant from the people who do the real work every day. Chelsea, I can't afford to live on minimum wage. Then you'll figure it out. Roommates, a smaller apartment, whatever it takes. If you quit, we're done. Not just with this opportunity, but as siblings. If you complain, if you act entitled, if you treat anyone on my staff with anything less than total respect, you're done. If you last 6 months and actually learn something, we'll talk about what comes next. He stared at me, disbelief and humiliation warring on his face. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out if there was any way to negotiate better terms. Then something in his expression changed. Maybe he finally understood that this was the only real option he had left. "When do I start?" he whispered. I pulled an apron from my kitchen drawer, one I'd brought home from the restaurant earlier. I set it on the table between us. "Tomorrow, 6 a.m. Don't be late." Dylan showed up at 5:55 on Monday morning, wearing designer jeans and expensive leather dress shoes. I was already there having coffee in my office, watching through the window as he walked up to the employee entrance, looking like he was heading to a casual business meeting instead of an 8-hour shift in a commercial kitchen. Maria intercepted him before he made it through the door. I couldn't hear what she said, but I watched her hand him a pair of non-slip work shoes from our supply closet and a hairnet still in its package. Even from a distance, I could see Dylan's face flush with embarrassment. Maria's expression remained neutral, patient, waiting for him to make the choice between his pride and his commitment. He took the shoes and the hairnet. Thomas briefed him on the basics, health codes, safety procedures where things were kept. Then he stationed Dylan at the industrial sink with Marco, our head chef, supervising nearby. The first breakfast rush started at 7, and Dylan spent the next 8 hours elbow deep in hot water and soap scrubbing pans crusted with baked-on food, rinsing plates, smeared with eggs and syrup, loading and unloading the industrial dishwasher. I watched through the kitchen window periodically throughout the day. He broke 2 plates in the first hour, dropped a stack of silverware that scattered across the floor, burned his hand on water that was too hot and had to run it under cold water for 5 minutes. By noon, his designer jeans were soaked and stained, his hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat, and his hands were pruned and red. The first week was worse. Dylan treated the whole thing like an elaborate role play, like he was temporarily pretending to be a dishwasher instead of actually being one. He made jokes to the other kitchen staff about slumming it, took breaks that lasted twice as long as anyone else's, complained loudly about the heat and the smell and the monotony. The other staff started avoiding him, finding reasons to be on the other side of the kitchen when he took his breaks. I heard one of our line cooks, James, talking to Maria on Wednesday. He's not going to last. He's going to quit by Friday and go crying to Chelsea about how she was too harsh on him. Maria just shook her head slowly. We'll see. Sometimes people surprise you. Thursday evening during the dinner rush, I was in my office reviewing supplier invoices when I heard raised voices from the dining room. I looked up to see a middle-aged man in a business suit standing at his table, red-faced and angry, berating Lily, one of our youngest servers. She was 19, working her way through community college, sweet and earnest, and trying so hard to do everything right. "Are you stupid?" the man was saying loud enough that nearby tables had gone quiet. "I ordered my steak medium rare and this is medium well. Do you not understand basic English, or are you just incompetent?" Lily's face had gone pale, her eyes bright with tears she was fighting not to shed. She was apologising, promising to get him a new steak right away, but her voice was shaking. I started to stand up, ready to intervene when I saw movement from the kitchen. Dylan walked out, still wearing his dish pit apron, his hands wet. He went straight to the angry customer's table, and I held my breath, half expecting him to make things worse. Instead, he spoke calmly, respectfully. "Sir, I'm so sorry for the confusion. There was a miscommunication in the kitchen, and that's entirely on us, not on your server. We'll get you a new steak prepared exactly how you want it. And please let us comp your dessert tonight as an apology for the inconvenience." The man's anger deflated slightly, caught off guard by someone taking responsibility. Well, someone should have said that from the start instead of sending out the wrong order. "You're absolutely right, sir. Again, our mistake. We'll make it right." Dylan nodded to Lily, who looked stunned. "Can you let Marco know we need a medium rare ribeye on priority?" She nodded and hurried toward the kitchen, relief written all over her face. The customer sat back down mollified, and Dylan returned to the dish station without saying anything else. I stayed in my office, but kept watching. Dylan didn't mention the interaction to anyone, didn't try to take credit or make a big deal about it. He just went back to scrubbing pots, his head down, working steadily. Lily came back from the kitchen a few minutes later and stopped at the dish station, saying something I couldn't hear. Dylan shrugged, said something brief, and she nodded before going back to her tables. The dinner rush ended around 9. Staff started their closing duties, wiping down stations, restocking supplies, mopping floors. Dylan's shift had ended at 8, but when I looked out at 10, he was still at the dish station, methodically scrubbing the counters and organising the clean dishes, even though that wasn't technically his job. Maria walked past him on her way out, pulling on her coat. She paused, looked at him for a long moment, then reached out and put her hand on his shoulder. Just for a second. She didn't say anything. Then she left, and Dylan stood there for a moment, staring at the space where she'd been before going back to his work. I sat in my office thinking about what I'd just witnessed. It wasn't redemption. One decent act didn't erase years of cruelty and manipulation. But it was something. A crack in the facade, maybe. A moment where Dylan had seen someone else's pain and chosen to help instead of exploit. I thought about calling Marcus to tell him what I'd seen, but decided against it. This wasn't about validating my decision to give Dylan a chance. This was about watching and waiting, about seeing if my brother could actually learn to build something instead of just taking from others. The ring on my finger caught the light from my desk lamp, for the quiet one who sees everything. I'd been watching Dylan my whole life, seeing the worst in him. Maybe it was time to watch for something different. Not to excuse what he'd done, but to see if he was capable of becoming someone new. Pride dies slowly, I thought. But maybe if you're lucky and willing to do the work, humility can be learned one dish at a time. 3 months after Dylan started working at the restaurant, a thick envelope arrived at Hartwell and Stone with a note from a local radio producer clipped to the front. They'd done a short human interest piece about my story, apparently, and this letter had come to their station, addressed to me. The producer thought I'd want to see it. Inside was lined notebook paper covered in careful handwriting. "Dear Ms. Little," it began. "My name is Sophie, and I'm 19 years old. I heard your story on the radio yesterday while I was driving to my community college classes, and I had to pull over because I started crying. I'm the youngest of 4 kids. All my siblings went to medical school like my parents wanted. I tried pre-med for a year and failed miserably because I hate science and I'm terrible at it. What I love is graphic design, but my family treats that like it's not a real career. At family dinners, my parents introduce my siblings with their accomplishments, and then they get to me and just say my name, like there's nothing else to say about me because I'm not a doctor. When I heard about you building a successful restaurant, while your family dismissed you, something in me broke open. Someone understands. Someone else knows what it's like to be invisible in your own family. I just wanted to say thank you for existing and for succeeding. You made me feel less alone. I read the letter 3 times sitting at my desk with tears running down my face. I didn't know Sophie, had never met her, but I recognised her completely. I'd been her at 19, believing that my family's inability to see me meant there was nothing worth seeing. More letters arrived over the next week. 12 of them, all forwarded through various channels. A woman named Patricia, 43, wrote about being the only daughter in a family of sons who dismissed everything she said. A 67-year-old named Margaret described raising 4 children while working full-time only to have her kids introduce her as just a mum, like that was the sum total of her existence. An 18-year-old named Keisha wrote about choosing art school over engineering and having her father stop speaking to her. The stories were different in details, but identical in shape. Women who'd been told to be quiet, to accept their place, to stop reaching for more than their families thought they deserved. Women who'd spent years believing that their families must be right, that they really were less than, until something cracked that belief open, and they started seeing themselves clearly. I spread the letters across my desk and looked at them. Really looked at them. This wasn't just about me anymore. It had never been just about me. Every family had a quiet one, someone whose voice got talked over, whose dreams got dismissed, whose existence got minimized. And those people needed to know they weren't alone, that being underestimated didn't make them less valuable. I called my accountant that afternoon. I want to set up a scholarship fund, $50,000 for the first year, split among 10 recipients, for women whose families never believed in them. I explained the criteria applications would include an essay about being dismissed or underestimated, what they wanted to do with their lives, and how financial support would help them get there. My accountant was quiet for a moment. This is personal for you. Everything worthwhile is personal. I named it Quiet No More and announced it through a press release. Applications started arriving within hours. Hundreds of them in the first week, each one a story of silenced voices and invisible accomplishments. Reading them felt like looking at 1,000 versions of myself, all the ways women learn to make themselves smaller to accommodate other people's comfort. A podcast host named Jennifer reached out asking if I'd do an interview about the scholarship. I'd never done media before, had always preferred staying behind the scenes. But this felt different. This wasn't about promoting myself. It was about telling those hundreds of women who'd written applications that someone saw them, that their stories mattered. The interview was in Jennifer's home studio, intimate and warm. She asked good questions, listened more than she talked, gave me space to find the right words. Why this scholarship specifically? She asked. Why focus on women who've been dismissed by their families? Because some of us grow up believing we have to earn the right to be heard. We think if we just achieve enough, accomplish enough, prove ourselves thoroughly enough, then maybe our families will finally see us. But the truth is, you don't have to earn that right. You were always worth listening to. The problem was never you. It was that the people around you didn't know how to see past their own assumptions. I paused, touching the ring on my finger. This scholarship is just me saying what I needed someone to say to me 20 years ago. You're already enough. Build your dream anyway. The podcast episode published on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, it had been downloaded 200,000 times. By Friday, 800,000. My phone started ringing constantly. Media outlets wanting interviews. Organizations wanting to partner. Women wanting to share their stories or contribute to the scholarship fund or just say thank you. I sat in my apartment, Friday evening phone on silent, feeling overwhelmed by the response. This had gotten so much bigger than I'd expected. I'd thought maybe a few dozen people would relate to the story. Instead, it felt like I'd touched something universal, some shared wound that women everywhere carried. My phone buzzed with another call. I almost ignored it, but the name on the screen made me pause. Mum. We hadn't spoken much since Dylan started working at the restaurant. She'd called a few times asking how he was doing, if I was treating him fairly, if I thought he was learning anything. I'd kept my answers brief and professional, but this call felt different somehow. I answered, Mum? Chelsea. Her voice was thick, like she'd been crying, jutting. I just listened to your podcast interview, all of it, twice. I waited, not sure what to say. I need to tell you something, she continued, something I should have told you a long time ago. Can I come over? I don't want to do this on the phone. You deserve to hear it in person. I looked around my apartment at the letters from strangers spread across my coffee table at the ring on my finger that had waited 8 years to find me. Yes, come over, Mum. It's time we talked honestly. Mum arrived an hour later, holding a worn leather journal against her chest like a shield. I opened the door and saw a woman I barely recognised. Her makeup was smudged, her hair uncombed, her hands shaking as she stepped inside. This wasn't the composed, critical mother who'd spent my childhood choosing Dylan's side. This was someone whose armour had finally cracked open. "Thank you for letting me come," she said, her voice unsteady. "I almost turned around 3 times on the way here. I've been carrying this for 35 years, and I'm terrified of what happens when I finally set it down." I led her to the couch and we sat with the journal between us like a small, dangerous animal. She touched the cover with trembling fingers but didn't open it yet. "When I listened to your interview when you talked about growing up believing you had to earn the right to be heard, I saw myself at your age, and I realised that everything I did to you, every criticism and dismissal came from that same wound." She finally opened the journal, and I saw pages filled with sketches and notes in handwriting that was unmistakably hers, younger and more hopeful. This was mine, my dream, before I learned to bury it. The sketches were restaurant floor plans, detailed and thoughtful. I recognised the DNA of them immediately. An open kitchen visible from the dining room. Tables arranged to create intimate spaces within a larger room. A small bar area where people could eat alone without feeling lonely. The concepts weren't identical to Hartwell and Stone, but they were close enough that my breath caught. "You wanted to open a restaurant?" "A small cafe, actually. Nothing grand, just a place where people could come for honest food and feel welcomed. I'd been developing the idea since I was 23, working it out in my head while I was doing filing work at my father's accounting firm." She turned page, showing me menu ideas, supplier lists, financial projections that were surprisingly sophisticated. "Your father was the only person I told. He thought it was brilliant. He offered to help me get a loan, said we could make it work together." "What stopped you?" "I showed these plans to my parents. I was so proud of the work I'd done, so sure they'd finally see me as something more than their quiet, disappointing daughter. My brothers were both successful businessmen by then, and I thought maybe this would prove I could be successful too, just in my own way." Her voice cracked. My father laughed. Not cruelly, just dismissively, like I told him I wanted to be an astronaut. He said restaurants were risky and I didn't have the personality to handle customers or manage staff. My mother said I should focus on being a good wife instead of chasing fantasies. I watched tears run down her face, making tracks through her makeup. "Your father told me to do it anyway, that we didn't need their approval. But I couldn't. I was so scared of failing, of proving my parents right, of ending up alone, and broke with everyone knowing I tried and couldn't do it. So I put this journal in a box and I never looked at it again. I got pregnant with you a year later, and I told myself being a mother was enough, that I didn't need anything else." She turned more pages, showing me the full scope of what she'd abandoned. It was all there, everything I'd had to figure out on my own. She'd already done the work, already mapped out the dream, and then locked it away out of fear. "When you were born, you were so quiet, so watchful and careful and gentle, and as you grew up, I saw myself in you more and more. That same softness, that same tendency to observe instead of demand attention. It terrified me, Chelsea. I was so scared you'd end up like me, full of regret, wondering what you could have been if you'd been braver. And so you tried to toughen me up by being cruel. I tried to make you angry enough to fight back. I thought if I criticised, you dismissed, your ideas made you feel small, you'd develop the armour I never had. You'd learn to push back, to demand respect, to refuse to be invisible. Instead, you just left. You moved away and built everything I was too scared to build, and I didn't even know it until that dinner at your restaurant." She closed the journal and looked at me directly for the first time. "You didn't become me, Chelsea. You became who I should have been. You took the same quiet nature I had and turned it into strength instead of letting it become a cage. You built the dream I abandoned. And instead of being proud, instead of celebrating you, I resented you for having the courage I never found. I picked up the journal and flipped back through the pages, seeing my mother's younger self in every careful notation. The layout she'd sketched was 70% similar to what I'd eventually built at Hartwell and Stone. The open kitchen, the intimate table arrangements, the philosophy of honest food and genuine welcome. She'd figured it out 35 years ago and then let fear convince her to bury it. "Mum, I didn't know. You never said anything, not once." "I never told anyone. Not even your father knew how serious I was, how much work I'd put into it. I let him think it was just a passing idea. I was too ashamed of giving up to admit how much it had mattered to me." She wiped her face with shaking hands. "I let silence become my prison. I watched you turn silence into power, and I didn't know whether to be proud or heartbroken. Both, I think. I was both." We sat there with her journal open between us, 35 years of buried dreams exposed to light. I thought about all the ways she'd hurt me, all the criticism and dismissal, and I finally understood where it had come from. Not from cruelty or malice, but from fear. She had been trying to save me from becoming her, not realizing that pushing me away would only make me stronger. "You broke the cycle I started," she said quietly. "You took what I was too afraid to pursue and made it real. That scholarship you created, those letters from women who've been silenced, that podcast where you told the truth about growing up dismissed. You're doing for hundreds of women what I wish someone had done for me. You're telling them they don't have to earn the right to exist." I reached across the journal and took her hand. I needed to hear this. All of it. I needed to understand why you treated me the way you did. It doesn't erase the hurt, but it makes it make sense. I don't expect forgiveness, Chelsea. I just needed you to know the truth. That every time I dismissed you, I was really dismissing myself. Every time I chose Dylan over you, I was choosing the child who didn't remind me of my own failures. I'm so sorry. For all of it. We sat in silence then, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence of my childhood. It wasn't empty or tense or waiting to be filled with someone else's voice. It was the kind of silence where healing begins, where two people finally stop performing and just exist together in truth. There was a soft knock at my door. Marcus's voice came through. "I brought tea. I'll leave it outside if you need more time." I looked at my mother and saw something like hope in her exhausted face. "Come in, Marcus. I think we could use that tea." 4 months after launching the Quiet, No More Scholarship, I met the first 10 recipients at a small reception room I'd rented for the occasion. They ranged in age from 18 to 53 each, carrying a story of being dismissed or silenced by the people who should have believed in them most. Sarah was 45 and had left an abusive marriage 2 years ago. She'd always loved baking, but her ex-husband had told her it was a waste of time, that she'd never be good enough to make a living at it. Now she wanted to go to culinary school to become a pastry chef. When I asked her what kind of work she wanted to create, her eyes lit up. "I want to make wedding cakes. I want to be part of helping people celebrate love the right way." Jasmine was 20, the daughter of 2 lawyers who'd mapped out her entire life before she could talk. Law school, corporate practice, partnership track. But Jasmine wanted to be a social worker, wanted to help kids who'd grown up the way she had, with parents who loved them but couldn't see them. Her parents had stopped paying for school when she changed her major. They said if I wasn't going to be a lawyer, I could fund my mistakes myself, she told me. Each woman had a version of the same story. Families who'd decided who they should be without asking who they wanted to be. Dreams dismissed as impractical or foolish or beneath their potential. Years of making themselves smaller to fit into spaces that were never meant for them. "This isn't just financial support," I told them at the reception. "I want to mentor you, check in regularly, help you navigate challenges, connect you with people in your fields. Because money helps. But what helped me more was eventually finding people who believed I was capable, even when I didn't believe it myself. A business publication called me the next week. They wanted to do a feature story, The Restaurateur Who Built an Empire in Silence. The writer, a woman named Rebecca, explained that they usually profiled loud, aggressive entrepreneurs who disrupted industries and made headlines. She wanted to tell a different story about quiet persistence and building something meaningful instead of just profitable. I almost said no. I'd never been comfortable with attention, had spent most of my life trying to avoid being noticed. But Marcus, who'd become a steady presence in my life over the past months, said something that changed my mind. "You're not doing this for you," he said over coffee. "You're doing it for every Sophie reading it, every woman who thinks being quiet means being powerless. They need to see that there's more than one way to succeed." The interview took 3 hours, and Rebecca asked questions that went deeper than I expected. Not just about business strategy, but about growing up invisible, about learning to trust my own judgment, after Dylan's betrayal, about what it meant to build something without announcing every step. After the article published, I started getting podcast invitations. I agreed to 3, all aimed at women over 40, all focused on second chapters and finding strength in unexpected places. I didn't tell revenge stories. I didn't paint Dylan as a villain or my mother as a monster. I talked about patience, about building when no one's watching, about the difference between being quiet because you have nothing to say and being silenced by people who don't want to hear you. The response was overwhelming. Women sent messages saying they'd finally started the business they'd been planning for years. Others said they'd left jobs where their ideas were constantly dismissed. Some said they confronted family members who'd been undermining them for decades. One woman, 62 years old, sent a photo of herself holding papers to register a bakery she'd dreamed about since she was 30. Through all of it, Marcus was there. Not in the spotlight, not trying to claim any part of what I was building, just present in the way that mattered most. He showed up at the scholarship reception and talked to each recipient like they were already successful. He read every article about me and pointed out the parts that captured something true. When interviews went badly or I felt overwhelmed by the attention, he'd appear with tea and give me space to process without trying to fix anything. One evening, after a particularly draining podcast recording where the host had kept pushing me to trash my family for better story drama, I came home exhausted and frustrated. Marcus was waiting on my doorstep with takeout and that quiet understanding that didn't need explanation. "You're exactly who I always knew you were," he said, handing me tea after we'd eaten. 10 years ago, I saw someone who built things carefully and honestly. Now, everyone else is finally catching up. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something that terrified and comforted me in equal measure. We'd been rebuilding trust slowly, coffee and dinners, and long conversations about everything and nothing. We hadn't talked about what we were becoming or where this was going, but sitting there in my apartment watching him exist in my space, without trying to take up more room than he needed, I realised I was falling in love with him again. Or maybe for the first time now that I finally understood what love without manipulation looked like. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for not trying to be part of the story, for just being here." "I don't need to be part of the story, Chelsea. You're building something important. I'm just grateful I get to watch it happen." A week later, an email arrived from a restaurant investment group I'd heard of but never approached. They specialised in helping regional successes expand internationally, partnering with owners who wanted to grow without losing the integrity of what made them successful in the first place. The email was straightforward. "We'd like to discuss expanding Hartwell and Stone internationally. When can we meet?" I read it 3 times, my heart pounding. International expansion, multiple locations, the kind of success that most restaurant owners only dream about. 5 years ago, even 1 year ago, I would have been terrified by this opportunity. Too big, too visible, too many ways to fail publicly. But now, sitting in my apartment with my father's ring on my finger, and my mother's old journal on my bookshelf. I felt something different. Not fear, not uncertainty. Just curiosity about what might be possible if I kept building. Honestly kept staying true to the values that got me here. I forwarded the email to my mother with a subject line that felt both risky and right. Want to help me design the next one? Her response came back in less than 5 minutes. She'd written only 2 words, but they were enough. Yes, please. I smiled and opened my laptop to respond to the investment group. This wasn't just about expanding a restaurant anymore. It was about taking everything I'd learned, everything Mum had buried for 35 years, everything we'd both figured out about building things that mattered, and seeing how far it could go. Not for revenge, not for validation, just to see what 2 generations of quiet women could create when they finally stopped apologising for taking up space. 6 months after that first dinner where everything changed, I sent invitations to Mum, Aunt Diane and Dylan for dinner at Hartwell and Stone's second location. We'd opened it 3 months earlier in a neighbourhood that was still finding its identity, the kind of place where long-time residents mixed with young families and artists looking for affordable space. This location was smaller than the original, more intimate. The walls featured photographs of everyday people, faces that told stories if you looked closely enough. Several were scholarship recipients, women who'd sent me photos after achieving their dreams. Sarah in her pastry chef whites, Jasmine at her social work internship. Others I'd met along the way, quiet women who'd finally found their voices. I designed this space with Mum, actually using some of the concepts from her 35-year-old journal. She'd cried the first time she walked through the completed restaurant, seeing her abandoned dreams made real through my hands. Dylan had been working for me for 6 months now. He'd moved through every position in the kitchen and was currently on the line, no longer the entitled consultant who'd shown up in designer jeans. He'd learned to show up on time, to respect the people he worked alongside, to take pride in work that didn't come with applause or recognition. He was preparing the first course tonight, which felt appropriate. They arrived within minutes of each other. I'd arranged the table, so I sat at the head mum to my right, Aunt Diane to my left. Dylan would serve, but wouldn't sit until I invited him to. The seating arrangement itself was a statement, a reversal of every family dinner we'd ever had, where I'd been relegated to the far end while Dylan held court. Dylan came out of the kitchen, carrying 3 bowls on a tray, his movements careful and practiced. He'd learned to carry dishes properly. From Maria learned that serving people wasn't beneath him, but actually required skill and attention. He set a bowl in front of each of us, and I saw his hands shake slightly as he placed mine down. It was Dad's bean soup. The recipe I'd made at 16 and been mocked for. The one that had taken me decades to understand wasn't bland but honest, wasn't simple but patient. Dylan had made it following the instructions I'd given him, boiling the beans 3 times, changing the water each time, letting the natural sweetness develop slowly. No one spoke as they lifted their spoons. Mum tasted it first, and her eyes filled with tears. She set down her spoon carefully and pressed her napkin to her face, shoulders shaking. Aunt Diane tasted it next and went very still, recognition crossing her face. She'd eaten this soup at our house countless times. When Dad was alive, had probably dismissed it as unremarkable. Now she understood what she'd missed. I let the silence hold for a moment, then spoke. I asked you here tonight because there are things I need to say, not to punish anyone or to hold grudges, but because truth matters. I need to say 3 things, and I need you to just listen. Mum nodded, wiping her eyes. Aunt Diane set down her spoon and folded her hands. Dylan stood near the kitchen door, listening. When I was 16, I spent an entire day making this soup for a family dinner. I followed every step Dad taught me, boiled the beans 3 times like he showed me, tried so hard to get it right. Everyone said it was tasteless and bland. Dylan ordered pizza. No one asked if I'd followed Dad's recipe. No one considered that maybe you didn't understand what you were tasting. I paused, taking a breath. I needed someone to ask, to be curious instead of dismissive, That night, I learned that my effort didn't matter to this family. Mum made a small sound of pain but stayed quiet. When I was 22, I had a business plan for a restaurant. I'd worked on it for 8 months. I asked for help getting a loan. Dylan laughed and told Mum lending me money would be throwing it away. She believed him. I had to get a bank loan with terrible interest rates instead. I looked at Dylan, who'd gone pale. I needed someone to believe I was capable. Instead, I learned that in this family, my dreams were jokes. Aunt Diane's face had crumpled, her usual sharp composure completely gone. When I was 30, I invited everyone to the opening of my first restaurant. Not this one, a small place I'd started with a partner. No one came. Dylan told me it wasn't worth the drive. Mum said she had other plans. Aunt Diane said small ventures weren't worth celebrating. My voice stayed steady calm. I needed someone to show up. Instead, I learnt that in this family, I was only worth attention when I was failing, not when I was succeeding. I set down my spoon and looked at each of them. I'm not angry anymore. Anger takes too much energy, and I need that energy for building things that matter. But I need you to know that your silence hurt as much as your words. Being dismissed, being invisible, being treated like my existence was an inconvenience. That shaped me in ways I'm still unraveling. Mum spoke first, her voice breaking. I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry, Chelsea. I saw you trying so hard, and I was so scared you'd end up like me, full of regret, that I couldn't see I was creating exactly what I feared. I should have asked about the soup. I should have believed in your business plan. I should have been at that opening. I failed you as a mother, and I can't take that back. I can only promise to do better now. Aunt Diane reached across and took my hand. My tough love wasn't love at all. It was me projecting my own bitterness onto you, trying to toughen you up because I was too weak to encourage you properly. You deserved support and encouragement, and instead I gave you cruelty disguised as wisdom. I'm sorry, Chelsea. I'm so sorry. Dylan stepped forward from the kitchen door. In his simple kitchen uniform, without any of the expensive clothes or practiced confidence he used to hide behind, he looked younger and more honest than I'd ever seen him. I took and took from you because I thought that's what strong people did, he said quietly. I watched Dad believe in you, and it threatened me because I knew if people looked too closely, they'd see I had nothing real to offer. So I made sure people didn't look at you, made sure you stayed invisible, because as long as you were dismissed, no one would notice how empty I was. He swallowed hard. You taught me that strength is building, not taking. That real power comes from creating something honest, not from standing on other people. I can't undo what I did to you, but I can spend the rest of my life trying to build something instead of destroying it. We finished the meal in silence, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence of my childhood. It was the kind of silence where healing happens, where truth settles into the spaces between people and starts to transform them. As we set down our spoons, Aunt Diane stood slowly and raised her water glass. To Chelsea, she said, her voice steady and sure, who never needed to prove anything. We were just too blind to see. 2 days after the family dinner, Aunt Diane called asking to meet for coffee. We went to the same diner where she'd given me Dad's ring, and this time she looked different. Not tired or defensive, but tentatively hopeful, like someone considering a door she'd thought was permanently closed. I've been thinking about what you said at dinner. She started stirring sugar into her coffee with more focus than necessary. About needing people to ask, to be curious instead of dismissive. And I realised I've never told you my story because I was too ashamed of how it ended. She pulled out her phone and showed me a black and white photo of a young woman standing in front of a drafting table covered in architectural drawings. It took me a moment to recognise Aunt Diane, maybe 25 years old, hair pulled back, eyes bright with ambition. I wanted to be an architect. I was good at it too. I had a portfolio letters of recommendation and acceptance to a graduate programme. But my parents said architecture was a man's field, that I should focus on finding a good husband and having children. They said my drawings were nice, but impractical, that I was too quiet and gentle to fight my way into a competitive profession. The parallel hit me like a physical blow. They told you to be quiet. They told me to be quiet and marry well and stop reaching for things I'd never achieve. So I did. I married your uncle, had a good life by most measures, but I spent 40 years looking at buildings and thinking about what I could have created. She put her phone away. When I saw you being quiet and gentle, I didn't want to encourage you. I wanted to make you angry enough to fight, because I thought if I'd been angrier, I would have succeeded. Instead, I just turned my bitterness into cruelty and hurt the one person who reminded me of my younger self. Aunt Diane, you could still... I'm enrolling in design classes next month. At 64 years old, I'm going back to school. Not for architecture anymore, but for interior design. Better late than never, right? She smiled, and it was genuine, unguarded. You showed me that it's never too late to stop hiding what you're capable of. The Quiet No More Scholarship Fund exploded after the podcast tour and business profile. Donations poured in from women who'd read my story and seen their own experiences reflected back. Within 2 months, we tripled our funding and expanded to 30 recipients, instead of 10. I asked Mum if she wanted to be co-director of the scholarship. At first, she protested, said she didn't deserve to be part of something like so meaningful after failing me for so long, but I insisted. This isn't about deserving, Mum. It's about giving your story a second chapter. You know what it's like to bury a dream because people told you it wasn't worth pursuing. These women need someone who understands that, who can tell them it's not too late to try again. We sat together every week, reviewing applications, and I watched her cry over letters that could have been written by her younger self. Women who'd been told to be realistic, to accept their place, to stop reaching for more than their families thought they deserved. Mum spoke to each recipient personally, told them her story reminded them that starting late was still starting. Dylan continued working his way through every position at the restaurant. He'd been with us 5 months now, and something fundamental had shifted. He still made mistakes, still occasionally slipped into old patterns of entitlement or impatience. But now he caught himself apologise genuinely and corrected course. Maria pulled me aside one evening after close. I need to tell you something about your brother. Last night he stayed 2 hours past his shift teaching our new dishwasher, Kevin, the full routine. Kevin's got a learning disability and he processes things slower, needs extra time and patience. Dylan didn't complain once, didn't rush him, didn't make him feel stupid. Just walked him through every step until Kevin felt confident. She paused. He didn't ask for credit or tell anyone. I only know because I was doing inventory in the storage room and saw them working together. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition that people could change if they were willing to do the uncomfortable work of facing who they'd been. A month later, a culinary foundation contacted us about their annual awards. Hartwell and Stone had been selected for recognition of our workplace dignity program, the way we trained and promoted staff with respect and investment in their growth. The ceremony was at a hotel downtown formal and well attended by people from across the restaurant industry. When they called our restaurant's name, I stood but didn't walk to the stage. Instead, I gestured to Maria, sitting 3 seats down from me. She looked confused, shook her head, but I kept gesturing until she finally stood and walked to the podium. The presenter handed her the award, a beautiful glass sculpture, and stepped back to let her speak. Maria stood there for a moment, clearly unprepared, then spoke with the simple honesty that defined her. I've worked in restaurants for 40 years. I've been invisible in most of them, just a body to take orders and carry plates. Some places were cruel, some were indifferent, but most just didn't see me as a whole person. She held up the award, her hand steady. This is the first place I've been served respect, where my experience matters, where my opinion is asked for, where I'm treated like my years of work have made me valuable instead of disposable. Thank you for recognising that dignity isn't a perk. It's a requirement. The room gave her a standing ovation. I watched from my table with tears running down my face, knowing that this moment mattered more than any business profile or podcast interview. This was what success looked like when you measured it in changed lives instead of revenue. After the ceremony, I checked my email and found a message from an address I didn't recognise. Rachel Chen, the subject line. Read, followed by documentary proposal. Ms. Little, I'm an independent filmmaker working on a documentary about family businesses and reconciliation. Your story with your brother. The scholarship fund, the way you're transforming conversations about family dynamics and forgiveness, it's exactly the kind of narrative I'm hoping to explore. I'd love to speak with you, and if he's willing, your brother Dylan as well. I'm not interested in creating drama or villains. I want to show what real healing looks like when people commit to it honestly. I stared at the email for a long time. Going public with the family dynamics, letting cameras document Dylan's transformation, and Mum's second chapter, and my own journey from invisible to visible. It felt exposing and vulnerable and terrifying. But it also felt important. How many families were trapped in cycles they didn't know how to break? How many Chelseas were sitting at dinner tables right now being dismissed, learning to make themselves small? I clicked to reply and started typing. Rachel and I met for coffee the following week. She was in her early 40s, direct and thoughtful, with the kind of energy that suggested she listened more than she talked. She showed me examples of her previous work documentaries about ordinary people navigating extraordinary transitions. Nothing exploitative, nothing designed for cheap drama, just honest stories about human transformation. I've been following your journey since that first article came out, she said, pulling up notes on her tablet. What interests me isn't the revenge angle that other outlets keep pushing. It's the reconciliation, how a family can be broken by silence and slowly rebuilt through truth. I want to follow you and Dylan for 6 months, document the reality of what healing actually looks like without the Hollywood gloss. Why us, specifically? Because you're not pretending it's easy. Your brother isn't suddenly perfect because he washed dishes for 6 months. Your mother didn't fix 30 years of damage with one apology. But you're all doing the work anyway, even though it's uncomfortable and slow. That's the story people need to see. Not fantasy redemption, but real, messy, incremental change. I told her I needed time to think about it, to talk to the people it would affect. She gave me her timeline and said she'd wait for my answer. That evening, Marcus came over and I laid out the proposal while we ate dinner at my kitchen table. He listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. What's holding you back? He asked when I finished. I've built everything in private, Marcus. I protected myself by staying invisible, by controlling exactly what people knew about me. This feels like surrendering the last bit of privacy I have. What if telling this story helps no one? What if it just turns our pain into entertainment for people who watch it once and forget about it? Marcus set down his fork and reached across the table to take my hand. You've already helped people by telling your story. The scholarship recipients, the women who sent letters, the ones who listened to those podcasts and finally started their businesses or left toxic situations. You didn't help them by staying private. You helped them by being visible and honest. But a documentary is different. It's cameras in our faces capturing the hard moments, the setbacks, the times when we're not inspirational or articulate. Maybe that's exactly what people need to see. That transformation isn't pretty. That healing doesn't happen in montages with uplifting music. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let people watch you struggle and keep going anyway. I thought about that conversation for 2 days before I approached Dylan. He was prepping vegetables in the kitchen during a slow afternoon, his knife work steady in practice now. I asked if we could talk and we went to my office. A filmmaker wants to make a documentary about us, I said, explaining Rachel's proposal. About the family dynamics, your transformation, the reconciliation process. It would be 6 months of filming, pretty invasive. I wanted to know how you'd feel about it before I made any decisions. I expected him to hesitate to worry about how he'd be portrayed to try to negotiate creative control. Instead, he said yes immediately. Really, you don't want to think about it. I spent years performing success I didn't have Chelsea, building this elaborate facade and then watching it crumble publicly. Maybe it's time to show what actual growth looks like, even when it's humbling and uncomfortable. Especially when it's humbling and uncomfortable. He paused, looking down at his hands. If watching me screw up and try to fix it helps even one person choose accountability over denial that's worth any embarrassment. I studied my brother, this person who looked like the Dylan I'd grown up with but moved through the world completely differently now. More careful, more honest, more aware of the space he took up and how he affected others. You've really changed, I said quietly. I'm trying to. Some days are better than others. But yeah, I think I'm finally becoming someone I don't hate. I called Rachel that evening and told her I'd do it with one condition. If this is going to be about anything, it should be about how many Chelseas are out there still waiting to be heard. I want you to follow some of the scholarship recipients too, show their stories alongside mine. Because this isn't just about me and Dylan. It's about a pattern that exists in thousands of families. Rachel agreed, immediately said it would make the documentary stronger and more resonant. We scheduled a meeting for the following week to review logistics and sign contracts. The day after I signed the paperwork, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It took me a moment to place the name Sophie, the 19-year-old who'd written me the first letter about being dismissed by her medical school family. Chelsea. I don't know if you remember me, but I wanted you to know that I just signed a lease for my first art studio. It's tiny and in a weird neighbourhood, but it's mine. I'm teaching graphic design classes and taking on freelance clients and actually building the life my family said wasn't practical. You were the first person who made me believe being dismissed by them didn't mean there was something wrong with me. Want to be my first customer? I'd love to design something for your restaurant. I stared at the message, feeling something warm and vast expand in my chest. This was why the documentary mattered. Not for me, not for recognition or validation, but for every Sophie sitting in a car crying because someone finally told her she wasn't broken for wanting something different than her family planned. I typed back, I'd be honoured. Let's set up a meeting next week to discuss what I need. And, Sophie, I'm so proud of you. Her response came instantly. Thank you for existing and succeeding loudly enough that I could find you. I set down my phone and looked around my apartment at the life I'd built quietly, while everyone thought I was failing at the ring on my finger, reminding me that quiet doesn't mean powerless, at the scholarship letters stacked on my desk, representing hundreds of women finding their voices. The cycle was breaking. Not just for me, not just for my family, but for every person who'd been told to sit quietly while other people talked. And this documentary would show exactly how that breaking happened, one uncomfortable, honest moment at a time. I picked up my phone and texted Rachel, "When do we start filming?" Her response was immediate. "How about tomorrow?" I smiled. Tomorrow sounded perfect. 2 weeks into filming, I sat across from Dylan in my office after his shift ended. Rachel's cameras weren't rolling yet, but they would be tomorrow when we had this conversation again. I wanted to have it privately, first to make sure Dylan understood what I was asking and why it mattered. "I need you to make a list," I said. "Everyone you wronged professionally. People whose credit you stole, whose reputations you damaged, whose work you claimed as your own. Write down their names and what you did to each of them." Dylan's face went pale. "Chelsea, I don't know if I can remember everyone." "Try. Because if you want to truly rebuild, this is how. Not through grand gestures or public statements, but through facing each person you hurt and making concrete amends." I paused. "You don't have to do this. But if you're serious about transformation, this is what it requires." He spent 3 days on that list. When he finally showed it to me, there were 9 names each with a detailed description of what he'd done. Jennifer, whose market analysis he'd stolen. Patricia, whose branding concepts he'd claimed. David, whose franchise proposal he had gutted and repurposed. Marcus, whose partnership with me he'd sabotaged. 5 others I didn't know, each representing a career damaged or stalled because Dylan needed to feel superior. "What do I do with this?" he asked, his voice hollow. "You contact each person, you apologize specifically for what you did, and you offer to make amends in whatever way they need, even if they reject you." Jennifer was first. Dylan contacted her through LinkedIn and asked if she'd meet him. She agreed, but chose a very public coffee shop I assumed for safety. Rachel's team filmed from a distance, capturing the meeting without intruding on it. Dylan brought a folder of documentation emails and drafts that proved Jennifer's work had been hers. He offered to write correction letters to the clients who still thought the analysis was his, publicly acknowledging her authorship. I watched the footage later. Jennifer listened with her arms crossed, skeptical and guarded. When Dylan finished his explanation, she said something that made him flinch. "I don't need your apology, Dylan. Apologies are just words. I need your actions. I need you to actually do something that proves you have changed." What would that look like? I mentor 2 junior analysts who are struggling to get recognised in this industry. Women, both of them dealing with the same dismissal I faced. You're going to mentor them too for 6 months for free. You're going to pass on knowledge instead of taking it. You're going to teach them how to protect their work and advocate for themselves. That's how you make this right. Dylan agreed without hesitation. I watched him write down their contact information, watched Jennifer's expression shift from skeptical to cautiously hopeful. The Marcus conversation was harder. Dylan had asked if I'd be there for it, said he didn't trust himself not to revert to defensive explanations if things got difficult. Marcus agreed to meet at a park-neutral territory, with Rachel's cameras filming from far enough away that they wouldn't influence the conversation. I sat on a bench 20 feet away, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to give them space. I watched Dylan sit down across from Marcus, watched him take a breath before speaking. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught fragments. Dylan admitting he'd sabotaged their partnership out of jealousy, that he'd seen Marcus recognise my potential before he did, and it threatened him. Marcus listening with his characteristic stillness, not making it easier, not offering quick forgiveness. When they finished, Marcus walked over to where I was sitting. "He's trying," Marcus said quietly. "I don't forgive him. I'm not there yet and might never be. But I believe he's trying. That's enough for now." Dylan spent 2 weeks contacting everyone on his list. Some meetings went well. Some were painful rejections. Some people refused to meet with him at all. Rachel's team captured what they could, but Dylan continued the process, even when cameras weren't rolling. This wasn't performance for the documentary. This was him actually doing the work. Then he wrote a LinkedIn post. I reviewed it before he published, made sure it was honest without being performative. 3 years ago, I took credit for work that wasn't mine. I built a reputation by standing on talented people and then discrediting them when they tried to speak up. I hurt colleagues, damaged careers, and manipulated situations to make myself look successful without doing the actual work. I'm not writing this to be forgiven. I'm writing this because truth matters, and the truth is, I spent years being someone I'm ashamed of. I'm working to be better now, but I can't undo the damage I caused. If I wronged you, I want to make it right. Not with words, but with actions. I'm available to anyone I hurt who wants to discuss as concrete amends. He published it without asking for my approval, which felt important somehow. The responses came quickly, a mix of support and skepticism and anger. Some people praised his honesty. Others called it too little, too late. A few pointed out that public confession doesn't erase private damage. Dylan read every comment, responded to many, but didn't defend himself or make excuses. Just acknowledged what people said and offered to talk privately if they wanted to discuss amends. That evening, his phone rang. I was in the kitchen when I heard him answer, his voice uncertain. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes. When he came out, he looked shaken. That was Robert Hendricks, one of the restaurant owners I took money from for consulting. I didn't deliver. He saw my post. What did he say? He said he doesn't forgive me, yet might never forgive me. But he's got a new restaurant project starting up, and if I want to do it right this time, actually provide real consulting based on what I've learnt working for you, he'll give me that chance. No, just the opportunity to rebuild my name honestly by actually doing good work. Dylan's hands were shaking as he told me this. I told him I'd call tomorrow morning at 9 to discuss scope and timeline. I looked at my brother, this person who'd spent 38 years taking shortcuts and standing on other people, now willing to work for free just to prove he could create value instead of stealing it. The transformation wasn't complete, might never be complete, but it was real. You're going to call him, I said. It wasn't a question. At 9 a.m. exactly. And Chelsea, he met my eyes. Thank you for making me do this. The list, the meetings, all of it. I wouldn't have done it on my own. I know. That's why I made you. I drove to Dad's old neighbourhood on a Tuesday afternoon when I needed space from the documentary filming, from the constant documentation of transformation and healing. Sometimes you need to sit with the past quietly before you can properly finish a chapter. The diner where Dad worked 40 years ago was gone, replaced by a bodega with bright signs and a steady stream of customers. But when I walked inside, I saw that they'd kept the original counter, that worn Formica surface where Dad had served thousands of meals to people who needed them. The owner, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and greying hair, looked up from the register. Can I help you? Just looking around. My father used to work here a long time ago. His expression shifted, became curious. What was his name? David Little. He was a line cook here in the 80s. The man's face lit up with recognition. David, I remember him. I was just a kid then, maybe 8 or 9. My family had just immigrated and we were struggling. Your father used to give my siblings and me free soup when money was tight, told my mother it was leftovers that would go to waste anyway. We knew it wasn't, but he let us keep our dignity. He extended his hand. Raj Patel, this is my place now. I shook his hand, feeling something warm settle in my chest. He was a good man. The best. I'm sorry for your loss. When did he pass? 8 years ago. Mr. Patel gestured to the counter. Sit, please. Let me get you something. On the house, in honour of your father. I sat at that counter where Dad had worked, where he'd learned to move fast and stay present, and feed people with care. Mr. Patel brought me a bowl of lentil soup, different from Dad's bean soup, but made with the same philosophy of simple, honest food. As I ate, I remembered being 8 years old, standing on a stool beside Dad, at our home stove, watching him make soup. He'd been patient with my questions, with my tendency to rush through the steps. Most people rush Chelsea, he'd said, stirring the pot with steady, even movements. They think good food happens fast, but the best things, they simmer. They wait. They become themselves slowly. You can't force it. You just have to trust the process and give it time. I thought he was just talking about cooking. Now I understood he'd been teaching me how to live, how to build something real in a world that demanded instant success and constant performance. Sitting at that counter, eating soup that Dad never made, I had a realization that hit me with unexpected force. I'd spent so long waiting to be seen, waiting for family to recognize me, waiting for the world to validate my worth. Even after building Hartwell and Stone, even after the scholarship and the media attention and the documentary part of me was still that girl at the end of the table, hoping someone would notice she existed. But validation from others wasn't what made me whole. The family recognition, the business success, the scholarship recipients thanking me, the podcast listeners sending messages, all of it was meaningful and good. But it wasn't what completed me. I'd been complete the entire time, building silently and patiently and honestly, becoming myself at my own pace, without needing permission or applause. Dad had known that. He'd written it in his letter, inscribed it in his ring, taught it through soup recipes and patient lessons. You don't become worthy by earning recognition. You're worthy because you exist, because you try, because you build something honest even when no one's watching. I finished the soup and thanked Mr. Patel, told him his father's legacy of feeding people with dignity was alive and well in this place. He smiled and said that was the highest compliment he could receive. As I was leaving, I noticed the young woman behind the deli counter, maybe 23 or 24, efficiently making sandwiches while handling 3 orders at once. She was quiet, focused, moving with the kind of competence that comes from taking your work seriously, even when it's not glamorous. She reminded me of myself at that age, working multiple jobs and building skills nobody noticed, being reliable and thorough and invisible all at once. I wondered if anyone ever thanked her for her consistency, if anyone saw how much effort went into making things look effortless. I pulled out 5 $20 bills and a business card, wrote a note on the back. You remind me of someone I used to know. Keep going. What you're building matters even when no one sees it yet. Chelsea, Little Hartwell and Stone. I handed it to Miss Patel. Could you give this to the young woman at the deli counter? Tell her it's not charity, just recognition. He looked at the bills and the card, then at me, understanding crossing his face. Your father would be proud of you. I hope so. I'm finally starting to be proud of myself. I walked out into the afternoon sunshine and stood on the sidewalk for a moment looking at this neighbourhood that held so much of Dad's history. He'd worked here when I was a baby before he moved to the restaurant, where he'd spend the rest of his career. He'd learned his craft here, developed his philosophy here, become the man who'd teach me that patience and honesty mattered more than flash and performance. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Marcus. Are you ready for tomorrow? Tomorrow was the grand opening of Hartwell and Stone's 3rd location, the one Mum and I had designed together, using concepts from her abandoned journal and everything I'd learned building the first 2. It was also the launch event for Rachel's documentary, a screening of the first episode that would show my family's journey from dysfunction to fragile healing. Tomorrow, I'd stand in front of cameras and crowds and tell the story I'd spent my whole life keeping private. Tomorrow, the world would see not just my success, but my struggle, not just the transformation, but the pain that necessitated it. Tomorrow, I'd be more visible than I'd ever been, more exposed, more vulnerable. And for the first time in my life, that felt right. I typed back to Marcus, more ready than I've ever been. His response came immediately. I'll be there, front row. I smiled and pocketed my phone, looking one last time at the bodega that used to be Dad's diner. Some places hold our past, remind us where we came from and who shaped us. Others show us how far we've travelled, how much we've grown, how thoroughly we've become ourselves. This place was both. And tomorrow, I'd honour it by stepping fully into the life Dad always believed I could build, the one where being quiet didn't mean being powerless, where patience wasn't weakness, where building slowly and honestly was the strongest thing you could do. I got in my car and drove toward tomorrow, ready for whatever came next. The 3rd location opened nearly a year after that first dinner where everything changed. We'd chosen the neighbourhood where I grew up, 3 blocks from my childhood home, in a building that used to be a hardware store. Mum and I had spent 6 months designing it together, blending concepts from her 35-year-old journal with everything I'd learned building the first 2 locations. The result was something neither of us could have created alone. Her eye for space and flow, my understanding of operations and efficiency. Her dreams given form through my execution. Our combined vision of what a restaurant could be when it prioritised dignity over profit, though we'd structured it to be plenty profitable too. The opening drew a crowd that spilled onto the sidewalk. Scholarship recipients, documentary crew, local press, family staff from all 3 locations. I stood at the entrance watching people flow in, and I felt Marcus's hand find mine steady and warm. Mum was supposed to give the opening remarks, But when she stood in front of everyone and looked around at what we'd built together, she broke down crying. Not quiet tears, but full body sobs that shook her shoulders. I moved to comfort her, but she held up a hand, took a breath, and spoke through the tears. 35 years ago, I designed a restaurant. In a journal, I hid in a box because I was too afraid to try. Last year, my daughter found that journal, and instead of judging me for giving up, she asked me to help her build this. She gestured around the room, her voice breaking. This is what happens when someone believes in you, when someone sees your abandoned dreams and says they're still worth pursuing. Chelsea gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. She gave me back myself. The room was silent, except for her crying, and the sound of other people reaching for tissues. I went to her then, and we stood there holding each other while everyone watched. I didn't care about the cameras or the crowd. This moment was ours. When we pulled apart, I took the microphone and kept my remarks brief. I talked about the staffing philosophy we'd implemented. 70% of our team came from the local neighbourhood people who'd been passed over by other employers because they were too old changing careers, had gaps in their employment history, didn't fit the image restaurants wanted to project. We're not running a charity, I said clearly. Every person we hired earned their position through competence and dedication. We're just proving what I've always believed undervalued doesn't mean unworthy. It usually just means people weren't looking closely enough. Dylan spoke next, wearing the chef's coat he'd earned after a year of working every position in our kitchens. He was lead trainer now for new kitchen staff, teaching them the same patience and respect he'd had to learn the hard way. A year ago, I thought success meant being above people, he said, his voice steady but humble. I thought the point was to climb higher than everyone else to make sure people knew I was important, and they weren't. My sister taught me something different. She taught me that success means lifting people, that real leadership is about helping others become capable, not about proving you're better than them. He paused, looking at me. I'm still learning. Some days I fail, but at least now I'm trying to build instead of take. After the speeches, Rachel stood at the front with her laptop connected to a projector. We've been filming the little family for 6 months, documenting their journey from dysfunction to reconciliation. This is a 5-minute preview of the documentary that will premiere next month. The room went dark, and the screen lit up with footage I'd seen in pieces, but never assembled. It opened with me at that first family dinner, sitting at the far end of the table, while Dylan held court. Then the reveal, Thomas's voice clear, "Welcome back, Ms. Little." What followed was unflinching. My tears in the office after reading Dad's letter. Dylan, drunk and desperate at my apartment. Mum's breakdown when she showed me her journal. The scholarship recipients telling their stories. Dylan scrubbing dishes and burning his hands. The difficult conversations with people he'd wronged. Rachel had kept her promise. She didn't make heroes or villains. She just showed humans struggling to transform, failing sometimes, trying again, slowly becoming different people than they'd been. It was raw and uncomfortable and real. The final shot was from last week, all of us having dinner at location 2. No speeches, no grand moments, just a family eating together, passing dishes, having normal conversation. The ordinariness of it was the point. We weren't fixed. We were just trying. The screen went dark and the room stayed silent for what felt like forever. Then someone started clapping. Others joined. Within seconds, everyone was standing applauding. Not just the documentary, but something larger. Some possibility that broken things could be mended if people were willing to do uncomfortable work. I felt overwhelmed suddenly by all of it. The noise, the attention, the weight of so many people's hopes projected onto our imperfect family story. I slipped out the side door while people were still applauding, needing a moment of quiet. I found myself in the kitchen, empty now that service hadn't started yet. The stainless steel surfaces gleamed under LED lights. Everything was clean and ready and waiting for the chaos that would begin in an hour when we officially opened for dinner. On the prep counter sat a single bowl of soup, steam still rising from it. Beside it, a note card in handwriting I recognized immediately. Maria's. For the woman who taught me quiet doesn't mean powerless. Thank you for showing an old server that it's never too late to be seen. This soup is made from your father's recipe, the way you taught us to make it. 3 boilings, patience, truth. Just like you. I picked up the spoon and tasted it. Perfect. Honest. The kind of simple that only comes from not trying to be impressive, just trying to be real. I stood there in the empty kitchen, eating soup made with love and patience, and I felt something settle into place. This was what success actually looked like. Not the applause or the documentary or the 3 locations. It was this, people learning to see each other clearly, to value work, that didn't announce itself to build things that mattered more than they impressed. The door opened and Marcus appeared, followed by Mum and Dylan and Aunt Diane. They found me standing there with my soup, and they didn't ask if I was okay or try to drag me back to the party. They just stood with me in the quiet, and that was enough. "Ready to go back out there?" Marcus asked eventually. I set down the empty bowl and looked at my family, this complicated group of people who'd hurt each other and were learning to heal, who'd been broken and were slowly becoming whole. Not perfect, just honest. "Yeah," I said. "Let's go celebrate." We walked out together, back into the noise and light, and crowd back into the story we were still writing. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of being seen. The celebration continued without me. I'd stayed long enough to cut the ribbon, to thank the staff, to watch people discover the space Mum and I had created together. But as the evening wore on and the noise grew louder, I felt myself pulling away, needing something quieter to mark this moment. I drove to the original Hartwell and Stone, the building where everything had started 5 years ago, when it was just an abandoned warehouse and a business plan I was terrified might fail. It was closed tonight for a private event tomorrow, dark except for the security lights that cast long shadows across empty tables. I let myself in with my key and stood in the entrance for a moment, breathing in the familiar smell of wood polish and the faint, lingering scent of the day's cooking. This place held so many memories now. The first nervous dinner service. The night we got our first positive review. The evening Dylan told me to sit quietly while rich people were talking. I walked to that corner table, the one where I'd sat a year ago, while my family laughed at Dylan's cruelty. I sat in the same chair I'd occupied then, but everything was different now. I was different now. The bowl of soup Maria had left me sat on the table, still faintly warm. She must have prepared it right before the opening and left it here, knowing somehow that I'd come back to this place, that I'd need this moment of quiet reflection before I could fully move forward. I picked up the spoon and tasted the soup. It was exactly right. Dad's bean soup made the way he taught me, the way I'd taught Maria and the rest of the kitchen staff. 3 boilings patience between each one, no shortcuts, no trying to force flavour that only time could develop. It tasted like honesty. It tasted like home. Tears ran down my face, but I was smiling. I sat there in the empty restaurant, eating soup and crying and feeling more at peace than I'd felt in years, maybe ever. I thought about the past year, how it had unfolded in ways I never could have predicted. That dinner, where Thomas called me the owner in front of my shocked family. The scholarship fund that grew from my private pain into something that helped hundreds of women. Mum's journal revealing that my story was also her story, that the cycle of silence ran deeper than I'd known. Dylan, washing dishes and slowly, painfully becoming someone who built things instead of taking them. Aunt Diane enrolling in design classes at 64. Marcus coming back into my life and teaching me what steady, honest love looked like. I'd spent so long believing that success meant making my family see me, making them acknowledge my worth, proving I was as capable as Dylan had always pretended to be. But that wasn't what changed anything. What changed everything was simpler and harder. I stopped hiding. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped waiting for permission to be exactly who I was. I didn't destroy anyone to get here. I didn't have to. I just built something honest while everyone else was performing, and eventually the truth became too obvious to ignore. Dylan destroyed himself by lying. Mum's regret destroyed her peace. Aunt Diane's bitterness destroyed her dreams. I didn't do any of that. I just refused to let their inability to see me convince me I was invisible. I finished the soup, slowly savouring each spoonful, making this moment last. When the bowl was empty, I took it to the kitchen and washed it myself. Old habits from working in restaurants from Dad, teaching me that you clean up after yourself, that no work is beneath you, that taking care of tools and spaces is part of the craft. I dried the bowl and put it away, then walked through the restaurant one more time. I touched tables, straightened a chair that didn't need straightening, checked that the kitchen was properly locked down for the night. This place was mine. Not in a possessive way, but in the way that homes belong to the people who tend them. I'd built this with my own hands and heart and stubborn refusal to give up. I locked the front door behind me and stepped out into soft rain that had started falling while I was inside. The streetlights caught the drops, making them shine like tiny stars falling slowly to earth. I stood under the awning for a moment, just feeling the cool air and watching the rain. Marcus was leaning against his car parked at the curb, holding an umbrella. He didn't say anything, didn't ask if I was okay or why I'd left the celebration. He just held out the umbrella and waited. I walked over and ducked under it with him. We stood there for a moment, close enough that our shoulders touched, looking back at the restaurant with its warm lights glowing through rain-streaked windows. "You good?" he asked quietly. "Yeah, I'm good. Ready to go home?" I nodded, and we walked to his car together, the umbrella keeping off most of the rain, but not all of it. Some things you just let touch you. Some whether you move through instead of avoiding. As we drove away, I looked back one more time at Hartwell and Stone. In the window, barely visible through the rain, was the help wanted sign Thomas had put up yesterday. It read, "Experience not required, dignity provided." That was the point of everything I'd built, not just the restaurants or the scholarship or the documentary. The point was proving that people deserved dignity regardless of their resume, that being quiet didn't mean being powerless, that patience and honesty were their own kind of strength. Some people spend their whole lives shouting to be heard, performing and demanding and trying to force the world to acknowledge them. I'd proven something different. You don't need to raise your voice to change the world. You just need to stop apologizing for who you are. You need to build something real while everyone else is building facades. You need to remember that being dismissed by others doesn't determine your worth. If someone ever tells you to just sit quietly while rich people are talking, remember this: maybe you're not meant to sit. Maybe you're meant to build your own table. And when you do, fill it with people who were also told to stay quiet, who were also dismissed and underestimated and made to feel invisible. Fill it with people who understand that the greatest power isn't in speaking over others. It's in making sure everyone finally gets heard. Marcus reached over and took my hand as he drove. I looked out at the rain-soaked city, at the lights reflected in puddles, at the world that had once felt so hostile and now felt like it might actually have space for me. My phone buzzed with a text. Sophie, the first scholarship recipient, sending a photo of her art studio with its new sign. 3 more messages came in quick succession. Scholarship recipients, documentary viewers, women I'd never met, saying my story had given them permission to try. I put my phone away and just sat with Marcus in comfortable silence, driving through rain toward whatever came next. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibility, full of peace, full of the knowledge that I was exactly enough, exactly as I was. And that was everything. Chelsea Little's story didn't end with that rainy night drive. It continued in every scholarship recipient who found their voice, in every quiet person who finally stopped apologizing for taking up space, in every family that chose truth over performance. 6 months after the documentary premiered, It had been viewed over 12 million times. The Quiet No More Scholarship Fund had expanded to support 300 women annually. Dylan was still working at the restaurants, still learning, still rebuilding his name, one honest day at a time. Mum had opened a small design consultation business, helping other women resurrect dreams they'd buried decades ago. Aunt Diane had her first client as an interior designer at age 65. And Marcus, he proposed on an ordinary Tuesday evening over takeout in Chelsea's apartment, with no grand gestures or elaborate plans, just a simple question and a ring that fit perfectly. She said yes, not because she needed him to complete her, but because she'd finally learned the difference between needing someone and choosing them. The original Hartwell and Stone still stands on that downtown corner, the place where a woman was told to sit quietly, and instead stood up in the most powerful way possible by simply being herself. If you walk past it on a Sunday morning, you might see Maria training new servers, teaching them that their work matters, that dignity isn't negotiable. You might see Dylan in the kitchen, moving with the patience he spent 38 years refusing to learn. You might even see Chelsea herself sitting at that corner table with her laptop still building, still quiet, still powerful. Some victories aren't loud. Some are just a woman who refused to shrink, who built an empire from silence, who proved that the quietest voices can change the world if we finally stop telling them to be quiet. Thank you for listening to Chelsea's story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever been told to sit quietly while others talked, if you've ever been dismissed or underestimated or made to feel invisible, leave a comment below. Tell us your story. Who told you to be quiet? How did you find your voice? And if you're still searching for it, know that it's there, waiting for you to claim it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about real people, finding strength in unexpected places, about transformation that doesn't happen overnight, about the quiet power of refusing to apologize for who you are. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that might change how you see yourself. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's been sitting quietly for too long, someone who's ready to build their own table. And remember, you were always worth listening to. The problem was never you. Now go build something beautiful. We'll be here cheering you on.